your thoughts because I don't know what to make of the market. Obviously, I'm a spectator, but it seems unsustainable.
The growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just the pricing. I mean, with inflation, with gas, with everything going on, it seems ridiculous that people can afford houses over market, especially.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I don't, in Humboldt at least, I feel like there's a lot of people also leaving. There's a lot of people coming, but I,
Are there a lot of people
I
leaving? I
feel
had not
like
heard
it.
that.
Yeah, I feel like there's people people who grew up here, families that have been here a long time, and they're kind of just, seeing the market go up, and they're like, hey, maybe this is the time we could go get that, dream parcel in Oregon or what have you, because there are people poised to still
Can you do me a
capitalize.
favor? Just
Oh,
turn that in. You can turn the mic, just turn it in towards your mouth just a tad
okay.
bit.
Is that
Perfect.
okay?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah. So
So people coming, people
yeah,
going. Because you
yeah,
hear about a lot of people coming in. That's big. That's been
yeah,
the big thing. Is
yeah,
all of these people from the Bay Area, from out of state, coming in and
yeah.
just buying up the real estate.
Yeah, there's definitely more people coming into the area and buying real estate, I feel like. And, those a lot of those people from the Bay Area have a lot of cash.
A lot of
So
cash.
that definitely affects what happens. And they're coming from really competitive markets where they're used to doing a lot of interesting things with their offers and stuff to secure a property. So that makes our market more competitive. I haven't seen our market really go to the same extent or measures as some parts of, the Bay Area or what I've heard, happens down
Just in
there.
terms of pricing.
Well, yeah, definitely. We're not kind of meeting that growth yet, but also just like people, when they write their offers, they can do certain things to kind of make them more attractive to the seller. And some of those things, each of those things carries a different level of risk for the buyer. So,
Things like.
like you have an inspection period, and during the inspection period, can make a decision on the property based on material facts, and you can find out, is there pest work that needs to be done? Is the wiring good? Is the plumbing good? Is the siding good? Is the roof good? Are the gutters
Is
good?
it structurally sound?
Yeah, all of that. And now I feel like I've gone on a tangent. I can't remember what was the original question.
Just that market prices are
Oh,
all
people
over
with
the
their
place.
offers. So when you're with their inspection period, for example, you can shorten that, and you can just say never mind. No
I was seeing that a
inspection.
lot with the inspections, with
Yeah.
pest inspections. People were just waiving them just to try to
Yeah,
get in and get a
well, and
house.
I mean, I didn't see a lot of inspections totally waived, definitely shortened. Appraisal waive is a big one, especially if you're financing. But I actually think all of that's kind of calming down a little bit. Not that it's not still competitive. There's a certain like class category of house that's more competitive. I feel like the average 3 bed, 2 bath,
Mm-hmm.
anything that's been sort of newly renovated in Humboldt and looks, sound and nice, people will definitely gravitate towards that, and it can get, multiple offers still or sell quickly. But yeah, so the big thing is that last month, mortgage rates went up really precipitously, like overnight, and everyone, I think, kind of just had a little shock for that for a second. I'm gonna turn my phone off. Sorry.
It kind of caught people off guard, would you say, in a sense? Because it seemed
Oh,
like they were
yeah.
slowly rising.
Yeah, definitely caught people off guard. I actually had a client that was like caught up in that, it was like the seller took a minute to think over their offer, and while they did that, the
It
rates went
climbed.
up a whole like percent. So it actually, in their case, equated to a pretty significant jump in their mortgage just overnight for, nothing different except what, the rates were. So yeah, so I feel like that definitely kind of brought everything to a little screech for a second, especially for being June when the summer market's just kind of getting up and going. You don't really expect to have a pause. So that, I think, I observed that anyway. I'm just one person though. I represent a very small, percentage of the market share. So there's other buyers, sellers, realtors, investors, and they may have had a different experience. Excuse me. I know, I've heard people say like, oh, well, it was just mortgage rates, so that just actually opens it up for cash buyers. But then I've also heard people say, well, cash buyers, when they see major fluctuations in the market as a whole, that's when they tend to back off and be like, okay, I'll wait and see what happens. So it's kind of like everyone gets a little gun shy for a second while we recalibrate to that. But I don't. I have heard that some people really expect things to get a little bit intense or way too expensive or
Meaning it's going to heat up more.
yeah, I mean, or that rates are going to go up and make it more and more difficult for people to buy. I don't know. Who knows?
That seems to be the theme, though, right? With the federal markets, is it's just going to.
Well, that's not my area of expertise, federal markets for sure. I work in Humboldt County, and that's kind of an interesting thing. It is a hyper local business, and that's kind of the other thing. Everyone always says, like every realtor always says, they have a unique market, because every market is unique. But in Humboldt, the factors that I deem unique are right now just a lack of building, new builds. So, pretty much everywhere else in the state, that's happening. Anywhere else you had that big rise, that's, in LA, I feel like it's happening a lot. And so that's where prices stayed a little bit steady, at least on the outskirts. And in the Bay Area, they went up, and they built, if you drive down the 101 corridor through like Marin, Novato, you can see all of those units. So they put in a lot of housing, but up here, we just don't have that kind of growth, and there's not a lot of space for that kind of growth. And we're a small county. We're not really set up to kind of entertain tons and tons of massive projects. I think the county will get there, but in the meantime, my impression is just we're still kind of small and rural, really.
So you think we're insulated in the sense that if
we have a lot of challenges being so rural, from like materials expenses and import and feasibility to like just the amount of staff on hand at the city, at the county, how many contractors are in the area, the cost of things, to for permits and the timing and holding on to properties while you're renovating them also costs investors and stuff. So there's just a lot there that make it difficult for the kind of growth that I think other parts of the state have had to help compensate. Actually, I'll just go ahead and say it, my big pet peeve is that I feel like we have this big bent towards affordable housing. And affordable housing is really important, but in reality, if we don't have entry-level owner-occupied units, like think condos or cooperative housing units, places where people can buy in, or even mixed use, like if you're going to put in a rental, if you're going to put in a 4 or 5 story rental, put a couple penthouses at the top and sell them, and make some owner-occupied units in there, because I see, and a lot of realtors actually won't even deal with these people, but I see a lot of people in the lower price point that work here, they're born and raised here, and they can't afford to buy anything here. And, they're qualified buyers, and they're not qualified for an unreasonable amount. In fact, it's might be embarrassing to say, but like a lot of them are qualified for more than what I was qualified for 6 years ago. And, it's kind of like scary for me to think about, wow, okay, great. We bought a house 6 years ago, right before, we thought things were kind of getting expensive then, but, little did we know, what have you. And I look at these families and I'm just like, I can't help you. There's nothing to sell you really that you can buy. And then also there's a whole segment of the population looking to downsize. We have big rural properties. We have properties that are, on their own septic. They have their own wells. They have little forests, and they have big fences and acreages and their own private driveways, and they just require all this maintenance. And older couples, older families, older individuals are living in these large houses on these larger plots and not really being able to like appropriately downsize, especially with the prices that have gone up. Some of them, even I've had people who, live pretty rurally in, for example, Willow Creek, where they're really isolated and they kind of need to, at their age, come into town a little bit and be closer to their kids or whatever. But there's nothing.
I can't afford
it. Yeah, there's nothing there unless they just want to, really change how they're living, which is a big shock for people. So I think that there's a missing segment of our market right there, and that's a hard one because I don't really personally have any power as far as what kinds of developments are put in, but it is something that I encourage people to think about, because I think all cities, even you could even say California, Pacific Northwest, they're all looking at growth and population increase, and we can get into all the different reasons why there's, I think migration is like a thing that's going to be part of the global climate changes that we're seeing. And, people are going to move from hotter areas to cooler areas, and we have that. So
we have a very desirable climate.
And location.
And, yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. I actually just realized recently it's only like a 9-hour drive to Seattle. And I was like, wow, that's actually... for
terrible.
all the times that we've pulled a long day driving to LA to be in a big city, I was like, wow, actually we should do that more. I didn't realize we were that close. But yeah, so we have a lot going for us, for sure. And a lot of California thinks we're still really affordable. So
yeah, I guess it's perspective, right? If you're local here, it's not affordable.
Yeah.
But if you're coming from down south,
people, like literal words would be like, wow, you wouldn't believe what kind of like tiny little co-housing unit I was looking at with a 1-bedroom for the same amount of money, and if this is like acreage.
Yeah, a 1-bedroom for like $2,500.
Well, that'd be rent, right?
Yeah.
But I'm talking even like buying. So people looking to buy, if you compare to some parts of even the Bay Area and stuff now, you just dollar for dollar, you can't really
compete.
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
That lack of entry-level single-family housing, what would you attribute that to? People just not selling their homes.
Okay,
private
so it's
equity
really
firms.
expensive to build.
Yeah.
And investors are savvy people. They're business people. They aren't just going to throw their money at anything. And when you look at what makes the most money, if you're going to invest in real estate, and if you have the money and can get in on developments, then you can make a lot of money like that, just having tenant-occupied units. You collect all the rent. And that's the thing. People don't really think about it that way, but entry-level owner-occupied properties is a wealth-building activity. So when you are paying a mortgage instead of paying rent, even if you're paying fairly high interest rates, which everyone's so concerned about, but even if you're not paying someone else's mortgage, a portion of that money is going to like a little savings account in the form of your equity, assuming that there's no major economic catastrophe or shift that damages your equity. It's a pretty safe investment. And so while it makes sense, like at a minimum, if you're going to live somewhere and you can afford to own the place you live, you will save money. You will make money from doing that, especially in California where rents are so crazy. So that's one thing about owner occupied units. But I actually was speaking with someone the other day and I didn't know this, so I haven't researched it myself, but what he was explaining was that, there's subsidies. There's like, I don't know if they're grants. I don't know where the money comes from, but there's sort of like money to support developers putting in, quotes, affordable housing units.
Is this separate from the ADU stuff California?
Yeah. I think this is more like, in some cases, I think it could be like Section 8 or HUD-supported housing. It might just be housing bent towards low-income individuals, or I think that it could be any number of stipulations. Like I've seen some units that are for just people of a certain age or disability, for example, and they're located like right in town. And those kinds of developments are nice because then people who can't get very far or have to be within walking distance have that option. But what this person was explaining that I don't know about all, developments like that can basically, in some form or another, you save money if you do this kind of development that's affordable, that is sort of like assisting the community in this way to provide a service as far as like giving housing to people who need it. But that, and actually California apparently just changed the law, but nationally after 35 years, you exempt out. And in California now, I think it's 55 years is what this person was saying. But after, that amount of time, you no longer have any stipulations on what you can do with that building as far as who you rent it to or how much you charge or whatever. You basically, it gets grandfathered out or whatever. So you've taken all this, taxpayer money to subsidize your building development, your project. And in a generation, you're not personally necessarily going to benefit from that. But as far as an investment goes, anyone who would be willing to purchase that building or take on any of it would still get the benefit of it. Anyway, there's a lot of I think money to be made. I'm like, oh, are people going to be looking at me for saying all this? I think it's common knowledge.
Yeah.
And I do also just want to put out there, like from an investor's perspective, like that's the big game, right? You have to sort of on some level also respect that this is individuals in most cases. In some cases, it's corporations, and a lot of individuals have corporations or what have you, but that's their money, you know what I mean? And they're spending it to, do something to make more money. And if that benefits the community, great. If it doesn't, at the end of the day, like, it's not up to us to say what they do with their money, So I think it does kind of fall back on our government and our politicians, or just whoever is in charge of really making the decisions of what kind of developments we have. I just wish that they would focus more on early, the early market, lower level market entry housing for owner occupied units for people who need
Yeah, it
that.
seems like that was out of a stretch for that low income housing, right? I thought I heard that they were doing a dollar for dollar match for a while. I don't know. That seemed a little bit crazy, but
Who was?
for low income housing, if you put up,
to
500
to
grand, they
create a
would put up.
development.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I don't know. Honestly, there are people who would know, but I only have so much bandwidth for
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. I just know that boots on the ground. I'm the person who takes those phone calls from, a young family with 2 kids or an older couple looking to downsize, when we do the math and I have to like say, you know what, like, it's not impossible exactly, but it's not likely, And like I know a lot of realtors who are like, if you don't have X number of dollars, I'm not probably going to work with you, because in the end, I'm going to lose time and money, because it's so unlikely that we're going to, and a lot of those people are using loans that, there's a certain class of loans, USDA loans or FHA loans or VA loans, where they all have low down payments or no down payments, and they have condition requirements. And so when you combine that in the mix, it's like, now you need a cheap house, but you need it to be in really good shape. So it starts making this perfect storm where, you have to be the bearer of bad news, and you want to help people, but you really, it's like,
What can you do?
it's like bailing out a boat with a spoon. Just like, I could
It's
show
not
you some
working.
properties,
Yeah.
but yeah. So yeah, that part's hard. So it's not just people looking to rent that can't find housing. There are people that would be willing to buy. And I just also like to put out there, I don't believe there's any kind of requirement of who invests in our county. I don't know that there even could be legally necessarily, but it's interesting to think about how if you have owner occupied units, those units become owned by a local person, because the owner has to live there, and as opposed to a tenancy situation where the owner can live anywhere, they're taking basically large sums of money out of our community and bringing them, to wherever their community is, wherever they
When they're being paid rent.
when rent is being paid to an out of area developer, which isn't every case. We have local developers as well, but I just like to urge people to think about that impact of that kind of development as well, because a locally, owned developer or I'm thinking of like multifamily units that also have owner occupied units would be sort of an ideal compromise where everyone, it's like a win-win.
Recirculating the money.
But in reality, just any owner occupied unit, it's going to stay more local. And I think that's important to think about as far as like the health of our community moving forward. So, it's interesting to think about. We'll see what happens.
Have you noticed that multifamily is as ridiculously priced as single family?
Multifamily, and I'm speaking primarily of coastal, Humboldt, and then of course, Arcata's its own little thing right now because of Cal Poly. But in general, multifamily does not seem, to my eye, to appreciate quite as quickly. So one consideration is that, you have different financing restrictions over units with a certain number of units. So it's pretty easy to get owner occupied financing, which can translate as to lower interest rate, lower down payment, like in a duplex, because you can use the income from the other unit to support your mortgage, but it's not an investment, it's a home. You live in one and you rent out the other. You can live in one and rent out the other two. You know, if it's a triplex, when it starts getting to 4 and above, I think it's 4 and above, that's when lenders are like, this is an investment. You're going to be getting more money out of it than you are going to be putting into it as a residence.
Even if you're living in one of
Even
the
if you're living in
units?
one, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. And they get funny too about it. Like, I once sold a large Victorian that had 2 stories, and it kind of had 2 apartments on each story, but it was connected by the staircase. There was no door. So it was a big house with basically a kitchen, bathroom, and 2 rooms on the bottom, and a kitchen and bathroom and 2 rooms on the second story. And the bank wanted to call that 2 units. You know, and it was like, well, it's not. You couldn't legally rent them out as 2 units, you know.
Because it wasn't separated?
Right, because there's no privacy. I mean, there's just a staircase between
walk
them.
up at
It's
any
one
time.
unit with 2 kitchens is what it is. But they wanted to call it 2 units, which would have changed the amount of money these people would have had to pay for their down payment. So it was just interesting. But so when you start talking about multifamily units and investment, those ones that could be more likely, the the triplex, the duplex, single family is not multifamily, but yeah, the duplex and the triplex are much more likely to finance as an owner occupied. Therefore, you retain a little bit more of the market when you go to resell. So those appreciate a little bit faster. When you start getting 3, 4, 5, 6 on up, those don't appreciate quite the same. And again, the more you know, it's interesting. The more units you have, the more work it is. And people realize that, you know, there's just less people willing to take on an 8-plex versus a 4-plex, right? And it's just more money, and it's more risk. There's, you know, in an 8-plex, there's 8 heaters and 8
more things that can
8
go wrong.
refrigerators and 8 stoves. And so that's really a business at that point. And you have to kind of take it like that. Not everybody does that kind of real estate that would do a duplex. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, compared to, you know, single family housing, multifamily housing doesn't tend to appreciate quite as fast, or at least it hasn't lately. Yeah. But then there's Arcata. So
Yeah, Arcata's its own ballgame.
Yeah, right.
You attribute that mostly to the Cal Poly situation?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just
Well,
because
and
of
it all
proximity.
happened at once. We got Cal Poly. We got word of the Google Echo cable going to Thailand or somewhere on the Asian coast of the Pacific. Yeah, so that, and then, you know, the Nordic Aqua Farms moved in, and it was kind of like, and then there's always just the reality that, like, if one big, for example, tech company moved into the area, that would just totally blow out and blow up our real estate market. I don't know that that's going to happen anytime soon because we are so isolated, but it could, you know. We do have, to my eye, quite a bit of like land for industry, you know. So that could be, and housing is still relatively affordable compared to, for example, the Bay Area. So who knows?
Do you anticipate that happening? I hadn't heard that sentiment yet.
I mean, it's kind of just like you never know when that's going to happen. And so when they put in like that big data hub in Arcata, there's like a big data hub there now. And now they're putting in this big cable. It's like, well, what kind of industry does that bring in? Cal Poly, my impression is that, you know, part of the Cal Poly part is technology. So I believe that I hope I'm not misspeaking here, but my impression is that the university's goal is to, you know, basically, I don't know about lobby per se, but you know what I mean, push for better, you know, better internet, better technology, better resources even for their students to learn from at a minimum, but also to benefit from. And I know that, you know, I think they see that as a benefit to the community, maybe even a selling point of the Cal Poly part, because it's like, hey, we're going to help, you know, bring Humboldt County into the modern era as far as technology goes. So, and then, of course, you know, thinking way down the line, I mean, if you have a university pumping out a certain type of, you know, graduate,
those STEM,
with certain skill set, and those people like where they live, which is very common in Humboldt for a lot of people, then you may end up breeding that industry here as well, like organically. So it's just something to think about longer term, being so close. For a long time, it's felt like we were so far from,
Everything.
Silicon Valley and that whole tech revolution scene. But the fact is, with everything, COVID, people's jobs moved online. A lot of people can do a lot of stuff with the internet now and just don't need to be in the office. And that's probably not going to change. So, yeah, people want to pick, they want to live in places like this. They want to, put down roots. So, yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens. It's not going to be logging, fishing anymore.
Yeah, those days are gone.
Lumber mills and crab pots will start probably, going by the way a little bit, at least in dollars.
Yeah, I've been interested in seeing how that plays out because Arcata it's a liberal arts area, right? It lends itself towards that. And where Cal Poly is doing this structural shift, I've been kind of waiting to see how that plays out. Because STEM kids and liberal arts kids are not the same.
Well, they've had a good science bent for a long time.
You think?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I can only speak to when I went there ages ago. But yeah, I mean, all the natural resources, and I mean, where else can you take a botany class where you're literally walking outside of your classroom door into a temperate rainforest where you get to see, in some cases, rare species of trees, unique, like wild rhododendrons don't just grow anywhere. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that there's, the oceanography programs, the forestry programs, the natural resource programs, the biology programs, I think have been really good for a long time. And this is just going to add to that. And I think that's why they qualified for it, because they kind of have been, geology. I mean, we are sitting on a triple junction of, these fault lines. It's like, it's an insanely earthquake prone, multiple problems with that situation. And so the geology here is fascinating, So, yeah, but if you're saying you think the liberal arts and the sciences might clash, that would be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because even with that, I would attribute that more towards liberal arts, even though those are fields in science,
Geology?
Yeah, well, geology, even anything with ocean studies, right? I would attribute that more towards people that are outdoorsy and
but
liberal.
that's different than someone who's doing like a outdoor education degree or a recreational studies degree. Because I mean, they had that degree for a while. I don't know if they still do. Or you're like, oh, I'm getting my degree in like backpacking and rafting. I mean, what could be more Northern California than that? Yeah, so that you're like trained. You get all the wilderness first aid and all that, but. So that is more of a liberal arts thing. But I think they have serious oceanography programs, and they teach, at a basic level. We're not offering PhD programs and stuff, but I think you can for a long time, you could get a pretty good science education at Humboldt.
Oh yeah, State, I think it's a solid program. I haven't really looked into it, but I think kids that would tend towards those degrees would also tend towards liberal arts degrees.
Possibly. I would just like to throw out having a background in education. It used to be STEAM, which had an A in it, not STEM.
Oh.
STEAM stood for
art.
I
didn't know that.
Art. A was the program. It was art. So having somewhat of a background in teaching art to K-12 students, there are so many ways to integrate art and science, and liberal arts and science, like some really cool interpretive ways. So that would be cool to see if Humboldt or Cal Poly could pull that off. But yeah, that's a little pet peeve of mine. It's like always STEM now, STEM, science, technology.
Never heard of STEM.
What's the M is like makers or mechanics or something like that.
Mathematics.
That's right. Yeah, but art was always in there.
Why did they drop art?
I don't know.
Just didn't fit the bill
at the
anyway.
Beginning. It's I think it would be hard. Artists aren't usually scientists. They don't, like you say, they don't usually. Oil and water.
So what do you anticipate? I know we were talking about your market report, and it seems like you are not in the fatalist mindset of, a crash is coming.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just take it as it comes. I do think that, I don't have the bandwidth in my brain to really follow closely like national economics. So, in my mind, I sort of go with that anything could happen. And anything did happen, right? I mean, our cost of living, the inflation, the prices just going up, then interest rates going up so that they could temper the whole thing. I mean, that's kind of like a not good situation,
it's not
right?
Great.
So what's going to happen moving forward? That's a good question. I just know I still have people that want to buy houses and are qualified to do so or have the money. I feel like how it might trickle down in my everyday life, at least in the next. And so I write my market reports every season, every 3 months, basically 4 times a year. So I don't, I try not to get ahead of myself, like you'll
With
read.
forecasting.
Yeah, because anything could happen. Like we don't, I mean, I don't want to sound like crazy, but we live in somewhat unprecedented times and we live in an interesting state and country and I mean, we just went through a pandemic. I mean, who knows what's going to happen next? And I think that I think there's ways of looking at real estate that feel safe to me. And that's part of what I do when I work with people, especially buyers. It's important to me that it feels right, which is, I don't know. Some people will be like, oh, I don't want to work with her. She's going on a feeling. But I mean, sometimes I know more about what they're doing than they do. And I feel very strongly about not getting people into situations that they have to pay their way out of or can't afford or, I have helped really young, innocent people sometimes buy their first home for their very young children, one on the way or whatever, and they would not know if they bought something that was ready to fall over if you leaned on it funny. Like they really wouldn't. So, that's just kind of where I'm coming from. And I feel like it is important for people to get into property if they can, because in uncertain times, it is very tangible. You've got a house to live in. So if it's between renting or buying, still totally buy. Who cares what the market's doing? Who cares if you pay 9%? I'm helping an older gentleman sell his house right now, and he's like, yeah, I bought this with 18% interest.
Wow.
This
See, a lot
this
of people hear that
property.
and they get scared about the interest
Yeah,
rates.
but he didn't regret it. He lived in that house for 40 years. You know what I mean? It was his dream property. So sometimes it might be worth 18% to do that. I mean, everybody has to make their own decision. I don't hope to have to work in that market. I don't want to see that happen at all, because that obviously represents a peak in basically the history of interest rates that we do
18%
not
is pretty
want
high.
to replicate. And I don't think in Humboldt County, I don't know what would happen, if we started going that direction. And is it possible? Yeah. I mean, I've read some national things where they talk about, like the long-term forecasting is corporate buy up of property, basically. I don't know. I've heard like Zillow's buying property. You know what I
Zillow,
mean?
BlackRock, I
Yeah,
believe, is getting
right.
into
And
it.
so that's kind of like, if that starts happening, that could have a total runaway effect and there would be nothing any of us could do about it. You know what I mean? If corporations were like, oh, real estate in small rural areas is the safest investment right now. What could we do? It would happen. So, there's no way to know. So, but in the meantime, I just start with, if it's housing, if it's for your housing, it's worth it.
At any price.
I mean, well, I wouldn't
Any
say at
price you
any
can afford.
price, but based on what, it's kind of an equation. I always say, like, real estate is one part financial, but it's also physical, emotional, psychological. There's a lot of factors. So you do have to take that all into consideration. If, there are probably, I mean, I haven't read them recently, but I have seen like studies where they say that housing, owner occupancy versus tenancy, provides a different kind of stability, not just to a family or an individual, but also to a community. So like children raised in a home that their family owns have a different experience of life than children in a tenancy situation. Um, and that's just, there are like outcomes that are measurable on that. And you can think about the different kind of disruptions people go through when they're in a tenancy situation. And then there's a whole bunch of like non-financial things, like the psychology, the emotion of it, of not being able to choose what color your walls are or whatever, all these levels and layers. So I know I'm going back to the owner occupancy thing and I'm trying to remember what was I going to. But anyways, at a certain level, there is a dollar number where that has a value for an individual. For some people, they don't care as much. They're like, oh, I don't care. I'll just rent. I might move here or move there. I'm kind of whatever. I don't really need to put down roots. I have enough money or I have investments elsewhere and I'm fine. Fine. Great. But if you're like, yeah, I know I'm going to be here. I'm not going anywhere and I'm paying too much for rent and I have a good job and I can qualify for a loan, then even make sense at a higher interest rate, I think, because of the long-term benefit to your being besides just your pocketbook. So it is an investment, but housing is also more than an investment, which is why real estate is so touchy for people. For a good time, you should go on Google and just type in realtors are. And the top like 10 things you get are just so scandalous. Everything from all
Do
the
people
expletives.
not like realtors?
People don't like realtors.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we're scum.
Why?
Because
you guys aren't the ones
we don't
selling
have
the
an
houses.
honest bone in our body.
That's the sentiment?
Someone posted that on my market report comments. Scummy realtors don't have an honest bone in your body or something like that. I don't know. People get really touchy because it's housing. It's home.
But that's like shooting the messenger, right? You guys aren't the ones.
So a little history. Originally, realtors and real estate was pretty unregulated. So people did a lot of shady things. Now, there is a distinction. In fact, if you hire someone that is called a realtor, then they have had they're part of the National Association of Realtors, and they've had an extra layer of ethics training, and they continue to do so, and they're sort of advertising that they abide by a certain ethical boundary, because there are weird gray areas sometimes where you have to, you're a fiduciary. That's different than just being a car salesman. You can, as a car salesman, I don't believe there's any fiduciary duty there. You can just, basically do what you need to do, even if it benefits you, to get something sold. You can't do that with housing. So, you do owe your clients ethical consideration above yourself. But if you just hire a real estate agent, they haven't necessarily gone through that. So realtors, sorry, I'm a realtor, they're better.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you can, but that doesn't mean that there aren't gray areas and that there aren't, sometimes things to think about and figure out what's the best way. There's legal considerations.
Is that just because you're getting a cut that people think you guys are trying to
up
the
the
price?
That's funny. I could talk about that. Yeah, well, excuse me. It does depend on where you are in the hierarchy of realtors. So like, for example, for me, when I take a commission, my broker retains some of it as a fee for overseeing me. Basically, they do have they are like the broker of record on a contract that I write. Is they retain that contract. Like if I died, that would still be an active contract with that brokerage. I'm an agent of the brokerage.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't work for them, in my own business, but they retain a portion of my commission.
You work along with them.
Yeah, they take a percentage. So off the top, they take a percentage. In the digital age, there's also a new trend where you get referrals from online people that have really perfected the art of funneling people from the internet to you to help with real estate. And if you find a good one, you'll pay like 30% off the top. 20 to 30% off the top to a company, a corporate referral, some company whose business it is to capture people's names, phone numbers, and then you cold call them and get them. So sometimes you're taking like a huge portion of that money, and then it's still a lot of money because it's a percentage, and then with prices going up, your pay goes up as a realtor as well. But on top of that, then there's all these costs and fees of doing business. And then we own our own businesses. So we get, self-employment tax, which is basically like doubling up on tax sometimes. So there's a lot of money out for how much money comes in. It's still a really good job. But I do know that some people have the impression they'll basically go, oh, a realtor gets paid 3% of the purchase price. That's a $1 million house. That's $30,000, or whatever it is. I think that's right. Yeah. And they'll be like that, they just made $30,000 in a month or whatever. But it actually doesn't add up that way. It's a lot of taxes. There's a lot of fees. Yeah.
Do you get to set your own percentage?
It is negotiable.
It's negotiable.
There are market standards, but it's negotiable with your clients and with your broker. I know that there was some talk, I think recently, about like moving to because right now, if you're a buyer, your commission to your agent who's representing you in your transaction is paid by the seller. That's the way it's done in Humboldt County 99.9% of the time. So it's nice because as a buyer, you're not going to have that amount of money. You're trying to put it all into a property. So and the seller is the one getting the big theoretically pay off. So that's how it works here. But I've heard talk that they're trying to switch it to make it so that, yeah, seller pays their agent and then the buyer pays their agent, which would really, it would just frustrate the market a little bit, I think. It'd be interesting. I don't think that'll happen anytime soon here, but it could.
Hmm.
It's all negotiable.
I didn't know that. Yeah, so when you are representing a client trying to sell their house, is it ethical for you to advise them on their price? Like if they come in and say, "Oh, I want to sell this for 450," and you're like, "We could really get closer to 5."
I mean, sellers are always wanting your opinion of value, and that is part of what we do. You should be able, as a realtor, to justify it. But it's an art and a science, to like, what's the market doing, Ami?
Yeah, because you
What
don't
can I
want it
get for
to
my house,
sit for 4 months.
Shockingly, people often have a number in their head of what they want for their house a lot of times. And I like to work with that number. And try to just work with what they want to sell their house for. Sometimes people actually need a certain amount to like pay off a mortgage, or maybe they have multiple mortgages. So there's a lot of considerations when doing that. As far as the ethics of it, this is like an ethics quiz right now, and I haven't done my ethics training recently. But I personally do not tell people what to list their price for, or their property for. I will give them a range that I think it would fall under, and I always give the caveat of, of course there's an actual like document that goes along with all listing paperwork that says, hey, the market conditions can fluctuate, because they can. So, hey, seller, we're putting your property on the market for this dollar. It doesn't mean we're going to get it, and it doesn't mean you're definitely going to get anywhere near it, because you never know. It's basically the advisory. But yeah, in that case, I really think it's important for sellers to choose their price, so that when and if things don't go the way they assumed they would, we can revisit and say, well, we tried it your way, or let's try it my way. There's a lot of strategies of how to price and how to handle pricing if a property stays on the market longer than you hope. Sometimes you have sellers who are like, this is what I want, and I'm not taking a dollar less, and that's it.
That's going to be a hard client to work with.
It is hard,
Yeah.
but also sometimes they're not wrong, Sometimes it's like, well, I kind of do think this property's worth that. So that's where you started getting into this really interesting thing that I observe. And I don't know if it's Humboldt County specific, because I've only ever worked here as a realtor, but I don't see it happening on HGTV or anything. But basically, like, if you go in, like, flipping a house is kind of hard to do, like, numerically, financially. It doesn't always pan out, really, in Humboldt.
It's risky.
Yeah,
It's risky
it is
anywhere.
risky. And there's a lot of things that local people who have lived here for a long time especially are looking for in a house or a property, where they will like be fine with a lot of not good stuff, because the house has this one kind of chicken coop they like, or it has a little section of redwood trees in the back, or what have you. So what's interesting is to see that, sometimes location and style, and actually I would also throw in there livability of a house, really impact what you can get for it. So maybe the windows are single paned, and it would cost $20,000 to replace all the windows in that big Victorian that's going to be super drafty. But so and so has this dream of living in a big Victorian, and they have ever since they were young, and so they don't care. They're going to still pay a lot more for it. Or maybe there's other things that have been updated on that property, and in some cases those things are not the things that I personally look for as a solid. Like, I'm like, okay, how old's the roof? How old's the heater? Like, I'm a maintenance person, so I want to make sure it's solid. I want to make sure there's not a ton of rotten joists in the or subfloor that needs to like all come out and get replaced, or a foundation issue, or whatever. But it's always interesting to see what people will look past if it's the right fit for them. That's where I'm saying it's like, it's physical and financial, but then there's this whole emotional part. Also, will be like, it looks exactly like I saw in my dream. And you're like, yeah, but it's slipping down the side of the hill. The foundation needs like an $80,000 fix. And they're like, oh, I don't know. It doesn't look that bad, or whatever. So you never know. I don't know how I got off on that tangent. Sorry.
I don't know, but that's a good tangent. The emotional aspect of buying, especially if you're investing, is dangerous. That gets people tied up.
Yeah. Well, and so the emotional aspect of buying and selling, I should just like to throw out, is it's pretty much there for everybody.
Selling in terms of
like if you're listing your house for sale, I mean, there's a lot
No,
of
but I mean
emotion
their
there.
emotional attachment to not wanting to sell it or
That
to
can
being
be a
attached to a
part of
certain
it.
price.
That can be certainly part of it, not wanting to sell, but you need to, either financially or physically, you know. You can't walk up and down stairs anymore and you don't have a bedroom on your first floor. So, got to move. That can be really hard for people to make that kind of transition for sure, especially if they're coming from not just switching houses. I should say, especially for people who have just lived where they've lived for so long. That's a big,
And become attached.
yeah, if people have hopped around the average homeowner lives in their home 8 to 10 years before they sell it. So if they've done that 4 times, then they're probably more comfortable moving, but it's hard to know. And then the other thing I notice a lot of is the stuff. Like, so packing and downsizing can be a really big issue for some people, especially if they don't have like full capacity to do it themselves and they need help, or some people can't even afford to get the help, or how are they going to move, so there's a lot to consider. But also, what if you're selling a property that was like your family homestead and, now grandpa's passed away and no one can really afford it? There's emotion there. Sometimes there's big families like that need to sell and one person's living there and has lived there their whole life and now they have to move. So there's emotion there, sometimes you're in contract, which this is the most common, and things aren't going your way or things come up. You find out something about your property you never knew and it's a real detriment. What do you do? Oh crap. Now we just like lost, $20,000 off what our value is. And we didn't even know, it's just disappointing, so, and they're for some people, this is the biggest investment they ever make in their life. For some people,
For
this
most
is,
people, I would
yeah,
say.
this is their savings, their life savings, their inheritance for their kids or whatever. So, a simple counter offer asking for a price reduction can gut someone, if they're like really counting on that dollar amount or whatever. So yeah, there's tons of emotion. And people get really upset, that people really will start to think sometimes people are trying to be shady, which sometimes may be true, but it's not, I don't think, as often. It's amazing how many times a upset buyer or seller will try to throw under the bus the other realtor. That person's like, they say they're shady, because realtors, people have a bad idea of realtors. So, and I have to be like, no, actually, they're a nice person. I've worked with them before. It's just a complicated situation. Anything can happen. So it is
Again,
kind of exciting that
is
way.
that just price gouging though, with the attachment to realtors, or they just people don't
Um,
trust them?
well, no, no, no. I mean, I don't think so. I just think because realtors historically are go-betweens. We negotiate, we help negotiate. We actually try to keep buyers and sellers apart if we can, because buyers and sellers will say things that cause legal liability for one or the other.
In
Or
terms of
like, oh yeah, that can stay. I wasn't gonna take those curtains. And then, 4 weeks later, someone moves in and there's no curtains. And they're like, no, they told me they were leaving the curtains. That's why we didn't ask them to fix the downspout. And then you're like, well, we didn't get it in writing. You didn't tell me you had that. So it's just better to like
keep them apart.
kind of keep them apart. Of course, that doesn't always work, but yeah, so we're go between. And if something doesn't go someone's way, sometimes people need to blame someone. So yeah, the really frustrating things can happen. And sometimes it's nobody's fault, sometimes it just is what it is. Like, you just have to deal with it. Yeah. Yeah, the hillside sliding out under the house.
What can I do?
We didn't know.
I'm not a contractor.
Yeah,
Sorry.
right. So yeah, we just got to go from here now. I know it's disappointing you can't move in, or you maybe can't buy this house and you're hoping to, but or whatever it is. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Housing is tricky.
I
People
mean,
have
think about it. It's
feelings.
home.
Yeah.
It's
your home,
home.
especially
It's
like
your
you said, if you've
home.
lived in it for a decade.
Yeah.
And then you're selling it. Someone's trying to lowball you, and you're like, "This is my house."
Well, and I guess that's maybe where I started on that tangent, which is that it's interesting to look at what kind of upgrades get you top dollar when you're selling versus what doesn't. And to me, it's not always linear. Sometimes you'll see a house that maybe someone's lived in lovingly for 25 years and they've really put a lot of attention to detail. And I see that stuff. I'm like, okay, and I do that at my house because I'm a home person. Like, okay, here's my vent where my heat comes out, and it's not the $7.99 vent you can go get at Ace Hardware. It's the $45 cast iron vent with the cool design that matches the motif of my house and the floor. Like, I notice that stuff, but a lot of buyers don't, and it doesn't always get the value you would think. So if you're thinking, I'm going to invest in these cast iron floor grates for my heating unit and it's going to sell my house, unlikely. But if you just love the way it looks and you can see your floor vents and you like it and you're going to live in your house for a long time, dollar for dollar, emotionally, that might be worth it. It's worth it for me, you know? But if someone goes in and has this house they've lived in and that they've touched up in all those little ways and they've put in all the money and all the finery and all of that, it doesn't necessarily pan out compared to someone who just, flipped a house with the latest trend and okay, the floor looks good. It's actually just a roll of linoleum. You know what I mean? Which is pretty cheap. Like, not, oh, it's durable. People will be like, it's
Yeah,
durable.
it's not a hardwood
But then you're
floor.
like, dollar for dollar, you compare it to this floor, it has hardwood floors that were recently refinished. That's more value. It doesn't always pan out. So it is interesting to see. I think there was a house listed in Blue Lake recently, and oh my gosh, it was so cute. Little cottage, garden. I mean, just really, really cute. And it was an open house, and I went for my client, and she was out of the area at the moment. She's local. I'm not selling every house to someone out of the area. Sorry. I know people give me flack for that. Don't tell. Humboldt's awesome. And it was so cute, and we're just gushing. It's staged. It's so, so cute. Anyway, on the second pass through, I realized in the kitchen there's no kitchen cabinets on the walls and there's no kitchen cabinets on the ground. It's just a bunch of tables and islands. There's a stove, and then that's it. Like the cabinet.
No cabinets.
Yeah, there is a cabinet down this weird. It was a cute old farmhouse, so the sink was in a different. You know how, I don't know if you know, in Victorians and old farmhouses, the sink can be in its own little closet almost, separate from the actual kitchen. But yeah, it just had no cabinets, and I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, we hook, line, and sinker on this cute house. There's no cabinets. Yeah. So all of that furniture theoretically would come out when the house sells, and then you would have this room that's supposed to be your kitchen with no countertops, no cabinets. Like, it was just
this empty room.
It surprised me, that I haven't looked it up. That I'm sure that house sold right away. I'm sure it sold for, it was right in the heart of Blue Lake, and it was cute as a button. Didn't matter. It had single pane windows or weird bedrooms that were kind of not functional, but also no kitchen cabinets. I'm sure it got good dollars. So it doesn't always pan out. If you owned that house and you wanted to update it to sell it, it wouldn't be worth it because people want it just how it is.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Do you think that's more indicative of just where we are in the market today? That people are just willing to take that just because everybody's buying everything?
Yeah. Did you ever see Edward Scissorhands?
I did not.
Oh, okay.
I know the reference.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's this suburb in Edward Scissorhands, and it's super plain, Monopoly plain, like green lawn, white box houses. And Tim Burton patterned that off of the town he grew up in, which is where I grew up in Southern California, in Burbank. And it's so cookie cutter. And we don't have that problem really in Humboldt, at least not historically. We do have our own little cookie cutter areas, but even some of our subdivisions and stuff are actually kind of unique and different. They're small enough. They might be 7 or 8 houses, but you're not seeing this tract housing where every house is the same for half mile or something, So people come here and there's all this character that they're just not used to. It's a cute little Victorian coastal town. And people come out of the woodwork if I list a craftsman, especially if it's a fixer, people like craftsmen. They just want that era of home. So we have a lot of building that happened here up to kind of a certain point, and then it stopped for a minute, and then it started again with newer housing. So most of, I think, Eureka and Arcata and stuff was pretty built out by even the 40s, and then they infilled a little bit with the Pearson housing and stuff after World War II. But There's not as much housing from the 70s or 80s, and then it picks up again in the 90s and the 2000s and stuff. But yeah, there's all this character. So people love that here.
Does character only sell in a hot market?
No,
It
no,
sells all the time.
not at all. Yeah. Like I say, I mean, there will be people whose dream it is to own a Victorian, and if it's a money pit, they don't care. They
They
literally
want a
want to
Victorian.
refinish the wood. That's their, like, they feel passionate about it. So, yeah, and I mean also they're not making more of them. You can't just go, buy a Victorian
That's true,
anywhere,
right?
So, yeah. Yeah, and here I don't know, I think there are other cities in the nation where they have a lot of character for sure, and there's old homes at a lower price point waiting for people to come and take good care of them and stuff. But here it's just the perfect storm with like the forest and the ocean and the rivers and the isolation and the temperature. I
Do
just,
you
yeah.
do you think prices are going to come down in the near future at all, or you think the interest rate is not
I
going to
think
deter anybody?
I mean, I think they could come down, but I'm envisioning personally something more like a plateau. They might fluctuate. I mean, they always do fluctuate a little bit. Even at the top of the market, I was starting to see like it kind of just depended like how many other properties came on the market that week. Oh, that was the only 2-bedroom house on the market that week. So yeah, it sold, and it sold for top dollar in 10 days because that's what we're doing, right? We're like, oh, there's one, grab it. So I don't think that's going to be happening as much. But it could be, if like, and I do always quote fire season, because whenever there's massive fire season inland, it even doesn't really even matter how close it gets here. If it's a wicked fire season, I get a lot of phone calls from people. Not every
Out of the area trying to
yeah,
come in.
and a lot of them aren't even people that end up moving here. It's like you can tell they're like grasping, like, where can I go? Because I'm done. That's what they say. This is our fourth time evacuating. We're just done. And some of them are trying to keep their property, their rural property, and some of them are trying to sell it first and figure it out. But yeah, I mean, something like that temporarily could cause prices to go up quite a bit. There's our market is small enough. What I'm saying is our market's small enough that if a few people decide not to list their property one week, it could matter
Makes
that
a
week.
difference.
But I think everything's slowing down a little with that kind of intensity anyway. There's still plenty of buyers and sellers. People always want to know if it's a good time to buy. So, what I wrote about in my market report, I always say if it's housing, yes. Yeah. I mean, because it's an investment in yourself and your family. Um, and if it's always a good time to buy if it just makes sense emotionally and you can afford it, do that for yourself. You would buy, but sometimes you buy yourself a nice car. You really don't need it to be that nice, but you buy it because you like it and you want it.
You're emotionally
Yeah,
attached.
and that's okay to do with a house or a property as well, for sure. I do think, the name of the game with real estate, like with most investments, is length of time. So I feel like when you look at real estate as an investment, it's still, if you can find one that the numbers pencil out on, having tenants usually pays the mortgage for you. So if you can afford to get that loan and do that, that does still kind of make sense. There's still a lot of people out there really looking for a deal. There's a lot of people I think in Humboldt that are not afraid to just put in some low balls for fixers or multi-unit properties. So they get a lot of flack too. A lot of people are like, oh, greedy landlords, blah blah blah. Well, I will say I just want to advocate for a second for the Joe Schmo landlord, the average contractor that maybe buys and or flips 6 houses in his career. He's not like turning them out. He's basically doing a project, trying to make a little money on the side. Those people are not gouging anybody. They're trying to build their business and they're just using that. And it takes a lot, especially these days, financially, especially to renovate a property. So we actually need those people in Humboldt County. We need them badly. I wish we had more. Just today, I don't know where I was driving over here actually, and I saw this house. It was all boarded up, and I was like, I have never seen that house before. Like it was behind some tree or bush or something, and it's like there's another house that someone needs to come and fix because it's right there. It's a house, but it's not, habitable. So we need those people. So I'm glad they're here.
That is not a common sentiment. I'm aware of the anti landlord rhetoric. A lot of people are not landlord favorites. They don't
Well,
like
and
them.
it's a line I walk. I mean, personally, not every realtor feels the same way about it, but how I think I've already expressed how I feel about like housing and home and land and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, if we, I think there, I would be curious what other realtors would say about this, but my impression is that we have quite a few small time house fixer upper flipper people. Um, and a lot of those people fix them up and rent them. And that's how they make their money back is the time collecting rent. Are they maximizing and pushing rents higher than they need to be? Well, it's a market demand situation. So it's not going to be any different with the, bananas you just paid too much for, whatever avocado fiasco we had, recently where the prices of avocados like doubled because of a situation in Mexico. So, you know what I mean? Like it's housing is also a business and it's that's an interesting, everyone has to kind of feel that out for themselves. So I've been helped out by landlords as a tenant, and I've also been like had bad situations with landlords, and I've seen as a realtor, I've seen some things that make me really sad. I look at a house and I'm like, okay, so that person's not going to be paying this tiny amount of rent anymore, but good gracious, they're living with rats. I don't think that's better that they get to live there for that. I think we need to address that. I think something should change. It shouldn't be okay, even at that lower price point, for someone to live in that kind of filth in our town. That's how I feel about it. So I don't know, it's also got that gentrification piece, and you have to watch that and be like, well, how much are we displacing people and how much are we improving the housing situation? And it's not one or the other, it's both. It's either or. We need to improve the housing situation and we need to not displace people.
Yeah, I think people get weird with landlords because there's this sentiment that housing is a human right, and then you have somebody profiting off people needing a place to live, and it gets dicey for them. They can't seem
Yeah.
to
Well,
manage that quarrel in their mind.
yeah, and I mean that goes so far deep into, I mean there's a lot of interesting politics around the history of land ownership. And I mean, we're all guests here. You're not, from the First Nation that was here before us. And we came and we changed the system of how land was used and transacted. Although, my understanding actually, and I really hope I'm not misspeaking here, but, different. Like I was reading a book about Wruck, which we're right near the office here, and it was talking about how different people would like sort of maintain the certain section of the quote food forest. So it's like, oh, there's this one patch of acorns or this certain kind of berry or whatever, and that belongs to so and so. Like you don't go harvest from there. So there was probably some system like that. It's obviously so different to tie it into our whole big economic structure and first world kind of dynamics. But I think also tenants, it would be great for them to also realize that in California, they are way more protected than in just about any other state that I know
Some
of.
would argue to protect it.
Well, so and the backlash for that is that landlords or investors or people who would be interested and available in investing in a community can no longer afford to do so, or they're taking on too much legal risk, and then it becomes kind of a question of like, do I want to take that risk?
Yeah, potentially be sued
Yeah.
because I got a bad tenant
Yeah,
and I can't get
I
them out.
actually called. I called a lawyer to go over a situation with a contract recently, and that it involved a buyer and someone buying a unit that had a tenant, and but that lawyer just at one point she just goes, buyers have no rights. They have no rights in this situation. I was like, wow, yeah, that's true. They really don't. They're like the separate third party. It's between the current landlord and tenant situation. But it was just interesting to think about all the ways that you do put yourself at risk. I've done a couple investor workshops where I've had people who are maybe toying with the idea of having rental properties, and I always invite a property management company, a local company. Not all property management companies are the same, and they do charge money, but I'm always reminded of how important it can be to have someone like that on your side when you're a landlord, because you can really you can be sued for a lot of things. So, I do think a lot of tenants are living in situations that they could sue for probably, and they don't know. But that's a whole nother breakdown in the system. But yeah, I mean, it's not great really in some cases for either side. So, I like I said, really in my life in general, I'm not an either or person. It's and also, you know what I mean? It's risky to be a landlord, and also landlords can really take advantage of their position of power. Both are true. So when people try to simplify things down to one way or the other, it's not great. I've totally, heard stories and talked to people who've been, wrecked by tenancy situations, or had properties damaged or what have you. And we've come a long way, obviously, with laws. I was actually talking to my mom, and my grandparents they had a family farm, I guess, but my great grandpa was not a farmer, and he ended up moving out with his wife and two daughters, and they could not find housing because they had kids. Which everyone I tell that to, they're like, "What? Like that's so illegal?" Which it is illegal. Um, but at that time, it wasn't. And they eventually found something stable and figured it out. And he ended up buying multiple properties, and in that time, only renting to people with small children to make up for it, because
Oh, wow.
he was affected by that. Also illegal, though. So,
Yeah.
but it was now, of course, not at the time. But it's just interesting to think about, like, how much worse it could be or how much worse it was for people. So, um, I would encourage, if you're going to stay a tenant, like, educate yourself on your rights. You can find so much of that information online. You can ask your landlord for it. You can say, "Hey, I'd like to, do you have information for me about my rights and stuff?" Because, I think there actually are some, laws around it. I don't really work in property management, so that's going into an area that's beyond my expertise. But I think there's even rules about what you have to disclose to your tenants, and I don't think a lot of people are really following the rules on that. So it's hard. It's all a big system, and then the government will go and change a bunch of stuff on
And
you.
not tell anybody.
Yeah, there was a law actually that just came out about just cause evictions. It didn't just come out. I think it got passed in 2019 and went into effect like January 1st, 2020. And then, of course, March 2020, all of our housing laws and eviction laws changed with COVID immediately. So it only recently actually like came back into effect. And it feels really new, but it's been it's been in effect since 2020. But you have to constantly shift and adjust when the laws
What is
change.
the law that just came back into effect?
In California now, there are, well, I don't want to misspeak on it. You'll definitely do your research, but there are only, I think, 4 or 5 reasons you can evict a tenant from their housing. And they are, this is like a test too. If you're going to do a major renovation, if you're taking it off the rental market, if a family, I think like a very close family member, like son, daughter, sister,
Immediate
brother,
family.
immediate family members moving in. I think there's one other. But yeah, there's only a few reasons. And if you do follow through with that, there's like, I believe that tenant can retain their last month's rent. That's kind of what the paperwork reads to me. So
Wow.
as like a moving bonus or what have you. So, and then, there's different laws for how long someone gets to move out and stuff. But
It's a
yeah,
process.
I guess all of this is just to say it's not as easy as just collecting a rent check to be a landlord. And there is a lot of legal liability. And I have seen it in some cases cost people so much money that they just didn't realize, something wasn't right, or they weren't doing it right, or whatever. They let their tenant through a legal loophole they didn't know existed. Who knows?
Do you own any property yourself?
Just
Outside
the
of a home?
house.
Just
Yeah.
your house. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever rented anything out or done any of that?
I mean, I was a renter before we
But
bought our
never owned
house.
property and rented
No,
it out,
I've
right?
never done that. Mm-mm.
Do you think you have this perspective just because you've worked with landlords as
Oh, for
well as
sure.
with
Yeah,
regular
yeah.
people?
And a lot of that stuff gets negotiated during a transaction too. A new buyer of a multifamily property gets to find out all the details about the tenants and their releases and what are the agreements. And so, yeah. And I feel like in Humboldt, I hope that as people buy and fix up properties, they're also moving towards better landlord practices. Actually, I'll just put a shout out because I just sat through a workshop. Shoot, I almost want to look it up. Cal Poly Humboldt has a program that they just, I don't know if it's newly launched. I just heard about it, but I think it's called the Humboldt Tenant Landlord Collaborative or something. But they have a whole YouTube channel, and it's basically a collaborative educational effort. They have all these videos online. So if you're a young person and you're wanting to move out and become a tenant, if you're wanting to rent something, they will help you figure out what you need to do so that you can appear appropriate on those applications. What are the landlords looking for? And then I think what they're trying to do is make some kind of little designation. So like, oh, so and so tenant just went through our little education program. They're like certified gold, whatever. Mr. Landlord, you now know this tenant has sort of undergone tenant training
Oh, like a
101.
vetting process.
A little bit. I think that's what they're trying to do. And then, but they also have something for landlords where they're trying to teach people about best practices as well, because there are those people who are like, oh, I have some extra money. I'm going to get this house. I'm going to rent it out, and they may or may not be doing things the right way. And they may be, it may not be great for that tenant. They might be losing out on some of their rights and that tenant might not know. So it just seems like a really good resource. The whole program, my understanding, was developed to help deal with like student houselessness.
Which is a big issue.
Yeah. So, I think that part's cool. And it sounds like if you're thinking about being a landlord, it might be a great place to start,
Yeah, that's
getting
an
some
interesting
information.
resource.
Yeah, a local resource. So.
Yeah. When you teach those classes, those landlord classes or investment classes for people interested in that, what are you providing for them? Just a general outlook?
Yeah, so for I usually get together other providers. So my husband, who's also a realtor, Brian, he and I will usually cover sort of like the ins and outs of shopping for an investment property, the types of investment properties, kind of what we went over, like different viability of different size properties and appreciation or income as far as rents. And then we have a property management professional come and talk about, what rents are doing, their services, maybe why you want to use a property manager. And they sort of do give a little education on, sort of some pitfalls, really. They're there to sell their service for sure. But also it is important. It's an education every time to be like, oh, I didn't know that was something. You have to look out for. And then we will also usually have a financial professional come and talk about different kinds of financing for investment properties, kind of also what I touched on as far as like, oh, this could qualify as owner occupied in the future, so it might be a better investment, or whatever the different situations may be. It's nice for people to be able to talk to a lender right away. That's another little thing, is that people often will reach out to a realtor first, or that's like cart before the horse. Like really talking to a lender is always the first step. If you don't already know your financial circumstance and what you can afford, it's definitely the first step. But yeah, so we only do them occasionally, little workshops, kind of cut back on it with COVID.
That's a cool resource, though. I didn't know.
Yeah, and I'm always happy to, set one up or take down names if people are interested in future workshops. But you get busy, and then it's like, oh. And now everyone wants like an online option. So then it's like, well,
that's a lot more work.
I could provide snacks, much easier than like a online, but maybe we'll get there.
Yeah. When you've been selling recently, have you noticed a lot of people going that landlord route, or it's still predominantly people looking for
people are always toying around with it in their mind, like, and I do bring it up because the rentability of a unit does affect its value long term. And sometimes people are looking for that, and they look at houses that are almost like too nice for that. It's like, well, there's so much to consider if you're looking at that. As far as whether, I feel like there's a lot of people that are always like, oh, and if there's like a mother-in-law, that'd be fine. We could rent it out. You know what I mean? Or if it had a second unit, we could rent it out, or whatever. So a lot of people sort of, I feel like, toy with that idea without necessarily even really researching it or really thinking about it.
They're just like, oh, this could be fun. Maybe we should think about
and it is true. I mean, when you get a property with a income unit, that income, a portion of it gets counted as income for you. So you can qualify for more. So I do like to have that conversation with clients because it's like, if you can qualify for a $450,000 house and it's great, it's just a regular house, but then you could also, with the income of a second unit, qualify for a $500,000 house, theoretically, using that income. You may want to do that instead. You may prefer the bigger investment. You may want, because, a house with a mother-in-law unit's also more likely to have a little bit more property. It might be on a bigger lot or in a more rural area. So there's all those considerations, but I think I like to think about rentability, and like, if something in your life happened, you're from the East Coast. Well, if all of a sudden, your family got sick and you needed to go back east, like, is this in a good location to rent? Would it be easy to rent, or is it kind of isolated and far and hard to get to and a little awkward and cold and drafty? And you know what I mean? You have to schlep your water with a pail. I don't know. But I mean, it's a factor. So, yeah.
Does that change the loan type that you can get? Like if you went for an FHA, you couldn't look at it as an investment property, could you?
That's a good question. I think FHA will lend. This is a lender question, but I think they'll lend on up to 3 units.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure they'll lend on duplexes. The main thing with FHA, and probably if it had more units, they would ask for more of a down payment, is my guess. A little more than, because they do I think they do like a 3% or a 5% down. Actually that one I was talking about with the Victorian with the 2 stories, they were doing an FHA, and that was a factor because making it into 2 units was going to increase their down payment. So what was the question again?
Just that if treating it as an investment property affected loan types.
Yeah, so it will. I think FHA and USDA are for owner occupancy only. But if you're going to occupy it and it has another unit, that's different. They wouldn't say you couldn't buy it.
No, but I was wondering if that would affect, because if you can look at it as an investment property, then you can get a greater loan amount, right?
Well, so I think only in the more nebulous sense that every property you buy is an investment. You know what I mean? If, when you write your offer, you declare if you plan on using it as an investment or you plan on occupying it. So, and people will sometimes write one thing and then things change and they do another. I've heard they're kind of trying to check up on people on that now, because it does, they do give you sort of a better deal, I think, if you're buying housing versus, there's different loan programs for housing versus investment. But there is a gray area where, you can buy a house and it might also be a good investment because it has a rental or something. But that's different than if you're like, oh, I'm going to go get a loan for this storage facility that I'm buying. That's totally different than if you're going to live in the house.
Yeah, I know they're a little more lenient with how they look at it if you live in it, right? Even if you're renting out a portion, like you said, as opposed to just buying it strictly to
Yeah, I don't know if it's lenient, but it's just less expensive.
Yeah. Yes. When most people are going to buy a house, do they know what to look for? I know we touched on that a little bit.
No.
No, they don't check the roof. They don't look at the fireplace.
Sorry, everyone out there, not even seasoned home buyers. Yeah, it's funny what different people's needs are. I had a client once. They were pretty inexperienced, and we were at the stage where we were doing inspections. And I walked in and I saw the buyer, and they just had their hands on the walls. They were just closing their eyes and feeling the wall.
Just getting a feel for the house.
And there's these inspectors running around checking for everything, and I think they just felt like they needed to do something, but yeah.
Did they say anything about it? I'm getting a weird vibe from this room.
No, nothing. They were just having a moment. I just backed out of the room and let them have a moment. But, I think I've heard from my clients that I'm extra, extra picky. I like to do a walkthrough in a house, and I like to point out all the good things and all the bad things. Just no judgment of whether it's pretty or cute or in a good location. Of just oh, I don't know, that roof looks a little old maybe, or that roof actually looks like maybe could even be new, or just even, oh, look, there's the intake vent for the heater that obviously hasn't had the filter changed in a very long time. That looks disgusting. To me, that's what else isn't maintained in the house, People don't look for like, people don't think about the age of the house in relation to lead paint or asbestos. People don't think about the age of the wiring or what that could mean for financing or
Yeah,
safety.
or the plumbing.
Plumbing. I mean, people love to walk into a house and flush a toilet, make sure it works.
That's a thing that they do?
Oh my gosh, people will, or they'll turn on. I feel like I'm like busting all my buyers right now, but I love you guys. No, like they'll turn on the sink to make sure it works, just like, does it drain, which is a good question. You need to do that, but they like to do it sometimes. Like I have some clients that will do it during the showing, which is just kind of
How
funny
funny.
during
I
the
was going to
showing.
say.
Yeah, so that's one thing that a lot of people don't know about buying a house is that when you're shopping for a house, it's a little counterintuitive, but the way it works, the process works, is you do end up needing to write an offer on something before you know everything about it. You're not going to find out everything you want to find out about the house. And so it's like you're making this huge investment and there are deal breakers somewhere in your psyche, and you're going to basically write an offer to buy a house before you know if your deal breakers are going to be broken. You know what I mean? So it's really counterintuitive. But yeah, the goal is to like get that property into contract so that you're the exclusive buyer. And then you have an inspection period where you can look into anything and everything. So that's how it works. But so many people, especially, first time home buyers or whatever, will go look at a house and they really like it. And then they're like, well, we'd like to find out about this first. Or we were wondering, we got to find out what it would cost to, change out that front door or something like that, And it's like, well, yeah, but not right now. Like,
Let's lock it down
yeah,
first.
you can make a reasonable guess or we can make a couple phone calls or depending on what it is, I do think it's good to write an offer like based on what you can see that might need to be done. But also it doesn't always work if you do that because a lot of
Can
buyers
you
don't do that. They just write their offer and see what happens.
can you adjust your offer after?
You can try to renegotiate, but a seller is going to want to see justification for that. So like, why do you want $15,000 off now? So yeah, you can renegotiate, and then it's just the game of like, well, who wants the property more, or who's gonna, you don't know if that seller has a backup offer. That backup offer could be better than yours. They could be like, great, you want a price reduction? Nope. I'll just wait right over here, see what you do. Know how. It's not happening. You never know. So yeah, you can always ask.
Yeah, it's worth a shot, right? You just have to get it locked down first, get it in
Yeah.
escrow.
So what I like to say, and Brian, my husband, says this a lot too, is like, like be reasonable. Like, is the house you're buying brand new? No, it was built in 1964. Is some of the stuff going to be from 1964? Probably. Is there going to be some normal wear and tear? Or is there going to be, different materials used back then? Or was code a little different? Or, don't like, try and gouge a seller because you found out later that in 1964 houses were built with this certain thing that you don't like, or I'm trying to think of an actual good example. So like if you walk up to a house and when the windows are like dual pane windows and they're failing, they're all foggy, right? So you can't see through the windows. When you write your offer, you should take that into account. You don't want to come back 2 weeks later to that seller and be like, well, it looks like I got to replace the windows and that's going to set me back $20,000. So I want a price drop, because the seller's going to be like, did you not see the windows? Now, a visual interpretation of something is a gray area, so you don't necessarily want to take that too far, but you should try within reason to write an offer that takes that stuff that you can see into account. And then when you do that, it sets it up so that later when something maybe does get discovered that's not visible, you can even approach that seller and say, well, I saw that the roof looked old, or I saw that your downspouts weren't connected, and I didn't think I would mind fixing, that fence that's broken on the edge or whatever, but I didn't quite expect for a $20,000 pest job under the porch.
Things you couldn't see.
Something like, and you look for like reasonable maintenance. I mean, every once in a while you see a pristine house and it comes back with a pest report that's like jaw dropping. And you're like, it's perfect on the outside. How could it be so messed up on the inside and need like a company to come from Reading and tent it for termites or beetles? You know, or you can see a house that looks a mess, like the paint's messed up, it's half built or half finished, there's drywall exposed, blah, blah, blah. Well, that just had a pest clearance 3 years ago and a new roof. And you're like, that's a deal, right? But people don't know that. And they'll just see that the paint's all messed up and they don't think about the 10, 20, $15,000 jobs that
Are gonna
could
add
come
up.
down the line, you know. So that's, you know, one really good reason to hire a realtor as a buyer, because they can help you learn and they can help show you things that you need to look out for and pitfalls and guide you in the process. And, you know, some people think it's better to work with a listing agent because, and this gets into the ethical area, but because, oh, the listing agent's more likely to want to sell my offer if they write it for me, right? Because now they might make more money. But that's really not ethical. And I don't, most of the realtors I know wouldn't do that. I'm sure there's some that would, but I don't know them. And I think that in that situation, wait, where was I going? I just totally started thinking about the realtors I know out of the area. Like where it's super cutthroat.
Unseen.
That's so funny.
We were talking about unseen damages and altering your offer.
Yeah, I can't remember. Oh, no, working with a buyer's agent.
Or
Yeah,
that.
so you can, of course, work with a listing agent. I don't think it's going to get you some big gain, like some people
It's
quote,
better to
say
work
it
with
would.
a realtor.
But in general, if you're shopping for a house and you're not super experienced with it or know exactly what you want or whatever, having a realtor to assist you is such a good idea. And as a buyer, like I said, it doesn't cost you anything. The seller pays the commission for the buyer's agent. So it's kind of like a no-brainer. Like,
Yeah, might as
you know,
well.
why wouldn't you? If you hop from realtor to realtor looking at houses just as they come up, you'll probably not get a lot of, I mean, you'll get interest, but as soon as a realtor, like we work for free till we get paid. And so if someone's not that serious about working with me, I'm not going to go chasing them down personally, because it's a waste of time. You know, it's like, if you want to put some energy and invest in saying, yes, I'll hire you, then I will be like, you can text me any time of day and I will help you. But if you're going to like be talking to that realtor and that realtor and that realtor, it does actually start to get into a little ethical gray area. And I work with all those people. I'm not interested in stepping on anyone's toes. If they feel like you're their client, I don't want them to like think I stole you or whatever. So there's a lot of dynamics, but I would just say at the core of it, if you're not sure where to start, just find someone, a realtor, and start working with them. If you don't like them, you can change to someone else. You know, if you're not feeling really helped or served, you can interview them. You can say, will you help me? Will you teach me? And some people will be straight up and be like, no, I don't have time. There are some really busy realtors that don't have time for that. That's okay. You know, there's lots of us out there. You can
Yeah,
find
there's
one.
no shortage, right?
No.
That's interesting. That's interesting in the sense that you would think that people would want to be as well versed as they can when they're making such a big purchase.
It's
And they
overwhelming.
would check the roof, they would check all of these things.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, sometimes you have the client that shows up with a spreadsheet, right? And you're like,
Just checking
okay,
things off.
you're off and
I
running.
got my list.
You know, they're really educated about it. And then other times it's people's just like, oh, I just don't want to pay rent anymore. Help me figure it out, you know? Like the purchase contract, I mean, I don't know how many pages it is off the top of my head. I mean, it's like a 16-page document. So, you know, just writing an offer, it's overwhelming. You know, I wouldn't expect people to know everything to look for. And even I've been on walkthroughs with contractors that miss things. So you never, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's hard to catch it all,
yeah,
right?
you can't always see everything. And, you know, you might be having, your mind might be elsewhere when you're looking around. You might not always notice stuff. Or, you never know.
Or again, your emotions come into play, right? And you're willing
Yeah,
to overlook
yeah.
things.
Yeah,
Like, I
it's a
just want
whole
this
different thing
house.
when you're looking with your eyes versus actually investigating a property for purchase. And that's where people might turn on because they're like, okay, we're getting an inspector. Great. They're going to tell me what I need to know. And that's why, you know, we use inspectors so we can get more information.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of houses sold as is.
So as is interesting. California is an as is state. And what that means is that when you buy a house and it's yours as is. I think like the story I like to tell is I worked with someone recently and their clients were doing their final walkthrough, which is just an opportunity to verify at the end of escrow that everything's as you
Saw
saw
it.
it. And like the neighbor like peeked their head over the fence and said, "Hey, they tell you about the car buried in the backyard?" And the buyers were like, no. And, they figured it out. There was no car buried in the backyard.
Oh wow.
Someone thought there was, but there wasn't, whatever they needed to do to find that out. Now, if they had closed escrow and taken title to the property and it went on record with the county, and a month later, the neighbor came over and said, there's a car buried in the backyard. And you find out, lo and behold, there is a car buried in the backyard. You own that car buried in the backyard. If the previous owner who sold it to you knew about it and did not tell you, now you have a legal case to seek damages. But if they didn't know, which, if it was something buried under the ground in the backyard, maybe they didn't know. If you can't prove that they knew or they didn't know, that's your car buried in the backyard. And now you know about it and you have to tell people about it. You can't pretend it's not there. And that actually happened with a septic tank in an area right outside of Eureka. Someone bought a house, they went to like bury it, put in a tree or something, and there was like this huge old concrete septic tank in the yard. And they were like, we didn't know that. And the seller didn't know it either. It had been on like city, services forever. I imagine it could have been found maybe in a document somewhere, but it's hard to know. Like, we didn't even have a permitting system, I think, until the 60s around here. So
It'd be hard to prove that
lot
they
of
knew.
hand dug septic systems. Who knows, So they didn't know. So those people now own a house with, on city septic, but also
As a septic
a
tank.
gigantic old concrete
Wow.
box in their yard.
What do
So
you?
as is, when it's being sold, though, like a lot of times you'll see on an MLS listing, seller wants an as is sale. That means it's not as technical. It basically means don't ask for him to do anything. Don't ask for them to fix anything or anything.
That's what I took that as.
yeah,
Was if you find damages.
and you know what else, though? You can always ask. So it's kind of weird. It's like if a seller says, yeah, this is an as is sale, don't ask for anything. It depends on what you find, right? Like, if you find something super significant that even they didn't know about, that was really like not able to be seen, you can still say, hey, we're in contract, but I'm not going to buy this anymore unless I get 10K off. It's still negotiable until it's done. You can always ask. So even if someone says as is sale, doesn't always mean that's how it's going to go. So it just gives you a little indication of how actually like cooperative the seller might be or how negotiable they might be.
What do you have to disclose?
So much.
Really?
Oh, me personally?
You or as the seller? If somebody's selling.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a huge stack of disclosures.
Really?
That's the number one reason to hire a realtor when you sell a house, is because that person will have all the forms ready for you to sign. There's like a massive stack of advisories. They're not just disclosures about the property. They're like, hey, buyer, you might want to check this out, XYZ. The onus of inspection is on the buyer. So if something comes up after close of escrow that the buyer could have investigated and they didn't, that's not on the seller. That's not their fault. If the buyer comes back and says, I don't know, who knows? It could be anything. Oh, my car actually won't fit in the garage and I have to have my car parked in the garage. I didn't know it wasn't a standard single car garage size. You didn't tell me. Well, the seller's like, I didn't know, or it was up to you to measure for that very specialty thing that you needed. It wasn't up to me to tell you the measurement of every opening of the house, So it's, again, a kind of little gray area on that one. But
what about things like damage to the foundation? Does that fall under the same umbrella of if the seller doesn't know about it, then
yeah. If you buy a house that's slipping off its foundation and the seller doesn't have any indication of that and you don't think to look, then it's yours. You can buy anything. You can buy a fixer, you can buy something with holes in the roof or half burned, like charred and needs a rebuild. So you can buy anything. And it's not up to the seller to tell you everything that's wrong with the property. It is up to them to disclose to you everything they know. anything material about it. And there's questionnaires that they fill out for that. And if there's anything extra, I always say just, get it all out, whatever it is. The questionnaires are a little silly though. Like one of the questions is like, have you ever basically done anything to the house? And, when you're selling a house you lived in for 40 years, they just look at me like, what do I put here? Like, yeah, we've done, have you ever painted any? Yes, it's been painted, so you just fill them out as best you can. But it's always better to disclose too much than too little. And probably things that people don't think about disclosing that could be important. Well, I recently learned that I think there's a database online with the either California or National Association of Realtors where you can like read different court cases around real estate, like what people sued sellers for or what people sued realtors for or whatever. But where was I going with that one? I was going to say that one that people don't really think about is like noise. For example, like not disclosing a noise, like an unusual sound, like your neighbor has a very
not even
barky
coming
dog.
from the house.
Yeah, a neighborhood. There's a whole section about neighborhood disclosure. We have a special disclosure in Humboldt that covers things like, noise from a Coast Guard helicopter or agriculture in Humboldt County.
Oh, that's crazy. I didn't know you'd have to disclose things that aren't even happening on your property.
Yeah, I'm not really all versed up on like why we have all the disclosures we do, but my general impression and I think the consensus is that they come out of lawsuits. So, as soon as there's like, oh, you can be sued for that now, then they make a new form for it to cover your butt.
People are very litigious.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, if it was me and I was trying to sell my house, I would definitely want a realtor to help me with that part of it because having that extra person and a paper trail could help you in the end. But that doesn't mean that, working with a realtor is not a guarantee, that everything's going to go perfect. So, but the onus of disclosure on a seller is probably the riskiest part for selling your property, is just failing to say something that, would probably more than likely affect the value. That's important.
Do realtors ever get sued for that, or it's always the seller? Realtors, really?
Yeah, it's a weird thing because what you say as a realtor really matters, and there's also laws around interrupting and disrupting current transactions or sales. Like, I don't believe it is legal. God, I feel like this is another test. Someone's going to check my answers, and I'm hoping they're all right. But my type A is not liking this. I'm squirming a little. But anyway, I believe there's laws like saying like, person A and B are in transaction to sell property or buy property, and you're person C, and you come in and you start telling buyer B something about the neighborhood or something, you just start trash talking it, and that person goes, you know what, I'm gonna back out, I'm not comfortable. I think seller A might have a case against you as third party C person. I don't think you can come in and just wreck a sale like as a third party. I feel like that's a long time ago test question, so I could be wrong, but point being, there are laws around how you interact and what you say and what you do and what people hear and what's sent on an email versus what's put in writing on a contract versus what was said in a text. There's like, real estate law is its own whole like field. Like you can totally specialize in that as a lawyer, and not just like there's, commercial real estate law and residential real estate law, and they're very different because residential real estate law has a whole bunch of like, protected classes that you have to do things totally different than when you're selling a commercial building because it's not housing. So yeah, that's a big, your questions are good. And that's where, a good realtor knows to say, I'm not totally sure.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you do have to be careful what you say, and you don't want to give people the wrong idea. That can happen easily,
Yeah, I guess you do have a lot of power in the sense that you could really tank a deal just by making an off-the-cuff
Yeah, I've seen
comment.
tenants do that without realizing it. You're walking through a property and a tenant will say something horrible, and you can just see the buyer go, oh, yeah, okay, never mind. I'm out. Oh, yeah, the guy upstairs is cooking meth. I mean, is that true? We don't know. Do we have evidence of that?
It's a deal breaker,
You know what
though,
I mean?
for a lot
But
of
like
people.
someone just threw that out there, and now you're like, okay, well,
Thanks for
It's
that.
not a fact about the property that we know of, but is it going to affect that buyer's perception of that property? Possibly. Yeah. So, um, and then, I do think it's hard because realtors are people. So, and we have preferences, things we like, things we don't like, and things that, like, you see someone and they really need a certain kind of property for a certain project and you can't relate to that because you don't do that project. You don't need, and that's why you do find people specializing in stuff. If you're really not into the outdoors, you're not going to do rural land sales. You're not, because you have to do extra different stuff. So, yeah, it is a personality based job, and you're going to jive with some people and you're not going to jive with others. I've been fired if wanted to fire people. It's a people job, and it's a very stressful time in people's lives. So you do have to sometimes be really careful. And then there's, someone ruins it for everybody, and now you can't say something a certain way, or you have to be careful with blah blah blah. But also, you want to do those things because you want to protect the ethics. You want to be a good fiduciary for people, or at least I do. So yeah, it's an interesting job for sure.
Yeah, I would imagine it can be a little hectic. It can be a little hectic.
It's an understatement.
Yeah,
Yes,
right?
it is. You're married to this phone. I'm more than married to this phone. I'm on like with it all the time.
Attached at the
Every
hip.
vacation, you have to like consider, will I have cell service? Will I be able to work? Because I'm much more likely to take a trip personally if I can work, because then I can, I can go longer, or whatnot. So it's interesting. You don't get a lot. You have to, make your boundaries and say enough's enough. I'm going to not work this morning for 3 hours and just shut my phone off, or
Is that
whatever
hard
it
for you to
takes.
do?
It is
To
hard for
separate
me.
yourself from
It's not
that?
hard for everybody, but it is hard for me because, especially if you're running a lot of transactions or reaching like a bottleneck of transactions where everybody needs a little piece of you, that can be really hard.
Crunch time.
Yeah. But you got to get it done. You just got to do it. So, yeah.
How many clients do you typically work with at a time? Does it
It
vary?
depends. For me, it varies on the season. I just have more clients during the summer. I think that's true of a lot of people. Excuse me. I think people like really, once school gets in session, it slows down a little. And then once the holidays are in swing, it slows down a little more. And then once it's the new year and it's like cold and dark and rainy, it slows down even more. And then it picks up again. So, um, I guess my peak number of transactions would be at one time. Well, and that's hard too, because it's like I might only have 4 transactions going, but I might have like 5 really active buyers that are out shopping for houses. So that's a lot of time, And if I have one buyer looking in Willow Creek or like Salyer, that's a whole day to go out there to see a property, or not a whole day, but it's like a better part of a day to drive out there and do a showing. So, I have a listing right now in Orleans, and it takes 2 hours one way to get there. So that's a big
commitment.
one. So it really does depend. But I think the most transactions I've been in the middle of was like 7, and that's a lot. That was a lot for me being one person. There's, different ways people run their business. They have assistants and stuff. I'm not quite to that level. I kind of do everything myself still. So
7 in a month?
They vary.
Varies.
Yeah, but 7 at one time. So they'll be in various stages. One will be in their inspection period. One will be closing next week. One we're waiting on an appraisal. It just depends.
How are the markets outside of like Eureka, McKinneyville, and Arcata?
Yeah.
Like when Willow Creek?
Yeah. Yeah. So
are those
I work
tapering out?
more in Willow Creek and that area than I do like in Southern Humboldt. I feel like Southern Humboldt's its own market, and I just like, if you're looking there, just get a realtor that's down there. There's some good ones, and they really know their rural properties, and they know that area. That would be my recommendation. And there are specialty realtors like that in all of the sort of outland areas, Willow Creek, etc. But most realtors will work inland as well. So I did someone commented on one of my market reports, like, you don't say anything about Southern Humboldt. And it's like, well, I don't really work that much in
Different
Southern
market.
Humboldt. I do here and there, but not as much as others. So I don't feel like I can say, but I did look at the stats, and it is just it's a different market. It's a little slower. They're different properties, they don't have the same issues, even if you start looking at like pest situation, like they have different kind of wood destroying organism that comes up because we have fog and it's colder and damper, and so it's a different market down there. The inland areas are still really popular, and
Really, even like Willow Creek, where it's more
yeah.
remote.
So here's the big issue is fire insurance. In the last couple years, it's with all the big fires that came through, it's sort of stabilizing now, but it can be hard to find insurance, and invariably it can be very expensive. It can add significantly to the cost of owning a property inland. So, and it's interesting because there are people that own houses out there that bought them before fire season was a thing, and their insurance rates are still, reasonable. And then the interesting thing about fire insurance is that it's coming closer and closer to the coast. And I have started noticing this primarily with like out of the area lenders who aren't as familiar with our tiny little like microclimates. Like for example, I had it happen with me on a property on Warren Creek Road, which is, along the Mad River, and you've got 299 Mad River, and then Warren Creek Road's on the other side. So it's like definitely, it's like one hill. It's on the back side of the hill from Arcata. It's very, as the crow flies, it's not even probably very many miles to the ocean, but because it had trees and was forested and was just a little bit inland, it ended up having this higher fire insurance premium. So that is more and more a limitation for people looking to buy inland. But we have such amazing rural properties here. They've got springs, they've got wood, they've got flat spots, they've got sun, they've got
Weather.
Yeah, there's temperate areas in Carlotta. I feel like Carlotta, this is just my little personal forecasting, is like going to be the untapped Willow Creek of the future, as people, Carlotta, you can still get like acreage on the water with like multiple houses for like $500,000. I mean, they're not all like that, but there's some deals out there, I feel like, for what it is. And it's a little bit cooler than like Willow Creek, a little closer like to a city than Willow Creek. So I feel like that's a, I guess what I would call up and coming. I think someday people will be glad they bought in Carlotta.
It used to be a little bit bigger than it is now, right? Didn't it used to be kind of a more popular
Carlotta?
spot? Yeah, I think there was a fancy
Oh,
restaurant out there, and they had a hotel
they
or something.
probably had more services maybe than they do like the little
I
businesses
think
and
it was
stuff. But
Carlotta, and then it just kind of died off. People left.
yeah, I just think of it more of like people who are looking for rural property that's not quite as fire prone and still kind of close to town. I feel like Carlotta is like the Blue Lake of Fortuna, right? So a lot of people don't think of it like that, but it's gorgeous up there. Like I've shown properties that are just mind blowing that if they were like two ridges over in Bayside would be $1 million properties, and they're like, totally
Just out
priced
of range.
reasonably
Yeah.
in Carlotta. So I think people overlook Carlotta. So sorry if you live in Carlotta and you want everyone to stay out.
Now it's gonna
But
blow up.
it's lovely there. You're lucky. So yeah.
That's funny. I wouldn't have thought. So fire insurance, even in Willow Creek, is pretty bad.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Even in Blue Lake,
Even in Blue Lake, it's pretty bad.
in
I can see Weaverville.
certain
Weaverville makes
rural,
sense.
certain rural areas. That like I think I don't really know. This is like an insurance expert could talk about it, but like my clients in those places have to take photos of their property that are like date stamped, that show the front of the house like in relationship to the trees. And I think they are starting, I'm not sure, this is total conjecture on my part, like it's almost like they're basing their premiums on what is the fire danger. I think they might be willing to take into consideration, like, do you have a metal roof, for example? Is that might lower your premium a little or something. It's like a risk assessment process or
So if
something.
you cleared out like a 20-foot boundary between you and the nearest tree,
Yeah,
would that help?
I don't know. I don't know that for sure. That's someone who works in that field, but I do think that there's like stuff like that. Like if you can
kind of finagle
or
it
they
a little
look
bit.
for that anyway. They look for how fire prone the property is, or the house specifically.
Do you think that's the biggest thing holding people up from going out there then? Is that in the fire insurance?
No, I think it's actually the distance. Because sometimes people will move to the area and they're like, oh, Willow Creek, it's only 30 miles away or whatever. That's fine for a commute. But then they get there and they're like, well, it's pretty windy and there's road work.
miles.
Yeah, it's not just like my commute outside of LA or San Fran or whatever their former commute was. So, yeah, I think that the distance is a little more what keeps people out. But yeah, fire insurance is definitely a factor.
Hmm. And it's pretty bad in Blue Lake too.
Well, I mean, I think again, I'm a little out of my
We're
scope
speculating.
here,
Yeah, nobody's gonna
but
hold
I
you to
do
it.
believe that if you're like in a town, like in town in Blue Lake, it's going to be a little different than if you have a property on the outskirts of town and there's trees and you're like at the base of a hillside or something versus no, I'm in the middle of a town. There's a fire department 2 blocks away. There's city water. You're more likely to be insulated from a wildfire if you're in that
Yeah.
situation. I'm not sure, but I do think they're looking at things on a more case by case basis. And what I am sure about is that the premiums for fire insurance have gone way up. So that's for sure a factor if you're looking to buy inland. And it's almost like you get an offer on a property, and yeah, you want to do that pest report and the home inspection and check the roof, but you need to call around right away for insurance too. Start getting that figured out because it could actually change your qualification if it's, because it's built into your loan in most homeowner situations. So it might actually mean that you can't. And so it used to be you could get, like private fire insurance through your regular, whoever your regular insurer is. And then I think premiums started to get pretty outrageous, and whatever happened, they now have the government fire insurance, which is the California Fair Plan. And I actually asked an insurance agent broker once because I was like, well, why would anyone pay like $800 a year more for your insurance? Like, why you're charging so much more than the California Fair Plan, which is the name of the fire insurance. And he made an interesting point, which is, I guess, like in the example of like the Paradise Fire, there was such a backlog with the government agency that people were waiting years for their checks. And, I've worked with a local insurance agent who I use, and I was interviewing her at one point, and she said, if your house burns down, I will be there that night with a check to make sure that you have a hotel room and clothes on your back. Like, I'll buy you socks, I'll buy you dinner, I'm going to come there. And I like got brought to tears because I was like, that's what's awesome about Humboldt, right? That's not going to happen with the California Fair Plan, but also not possible. It might be possible that you're waiting a very long time for your money, and if you don't have resources, it could really wreck your life. So that was just an interesting consideration. And I wonder, as things warm up, like, could we see fires like that coming to the coast? I mean, I hope not. People have been wondering, has it burned before? I mean, I felt like a really big fire hit the Santa Cruz coast a couple years ago, and that was
It's not out of the realm of possibility.
not that different. So who knows? I would hope that on the coast we can avoid the insurance premiums, but we'll see. That's really not up to us. There's nothing we can do about it.
Are you noticing any change in who is buying now in terms of local versus
Um,
out of the area?
no, I mean, not necessarily. There's always been people coming and going from Humboldt County. We
Mm-hmm.
have certain industries that are in need of professionals that they, recruit and hire from out of the area and bring people in, and it's not always a good fit. And, I don't necessarily say that. Definitely there's people coming from out of the area. Are there more people coming from out of the area? Maybe, yeah. There's definitely more people with their cash that are. It's like a little more of a vibe, I guess. It's not like it's. I don't know that it's necessarily more people, or it's just more of like an awareness about it, and also just because the market got so competitive, those people got sort of spotlighted, you know. But I think the market would have. I don't know. I think that people coming from the out of area definitely drove up our market, but also it just went up on its own. I feel like for the economics of the world, the economics of this state. And I think it's not like, I mean, there was a point where we were like, oh, Humboldt County just got discovered. The Wall Street Journal and Realtor.com, like the same month, named Humboldt County as one of the top 10 markets in the nation. So, okay, there's
I
that
didn't
kind
know
of
about that.
exposure. Yeah. So it sounds almost stupid for me to say, oh, yeah, no, people aren't coming from out of the area. But, that was based on price increase, and investment statistics. So I think that our area is growing. um, somewhat naturally is what I mean to say. Yes, there are people coming into the area, but we need them here to do some of our jobs. It's not a feeding frenzy. Not everyone who's coming from out of the area is some like landlord piranha trying to swoop up all our property. There are a lot of people who want to live here, who want to retire here, who went to school here and moved away for 20 years and now they want to come back, or served on the Coast Guard base and loved it and now they're retired and they want to come back, or so there's a lot of reasons why I feel like people come to Humboldt, and it's not just because of the real estate, and I think that it's natural for people to come and go a little bit. So it's hard for me when, people want me to say, yes, everyone's coming from the Bay Area with all their cash and buying up all
And
our
blame it on
properties.
them.
And that's not wrong. But like I said, it's not either or, it's and also. Those people are out there. But also there's like really good people that have really interesting skills that we want in Humboldt County. We want them to be members of our community. We want more diversity. We want all of that good stuff. So we want more scientists, we want more artists, and those people are coming too, in my opinion, in my experience. So I'm not worried, but I do think that the culture of our community is changing and will continue to change. Like, I talk to sometimes people who, were born and raised here and, lived here so much longer than me. And I think about what they must have seen change. I moved here in 95. So I know what I've seen change. So when I think about what they must have seen change, it's kind of boggling. But, there's no turning back. And
You can't stop progress.
Yeah, I do get that a lot. And actually, it's only going to get worse. I'll plug my website right now, which is at homeinhumboldt.com. And we're working on basically filling it up as a local resource for where to eat, where to play, where to stay, where to have fun, how to enjoy Humboldt County, all the good that we have to offer. It's not going to be any kind of news outlet, but we do, focus on what events are out there, what classes are out there. And then, I'm a realtor, so there's also a real estate component. But it is kind of one big sales pitch for how amazing Humboldt County is. And I've actually had friends like private message me and be like, your website's so beautiful, but could you just not? Like, we don't want anyone else to know. And I'm like, I wish I had that much power to like control who wants to come here, but I know I'm not that. I get to see on the back end how many people actually visit my website, and it's not that many. Like, I'm not part of that problem. It's happening, so. And I don't think there's no way to stop it, It just is what it is. So
Yeah, and like you said, with all these businesses and these ventures with Cal Poly Humboldt and the wind farm they're trying to do and the aqua farm, it's not going to stop. It's going to keep getting worse. My thought is just because it seems like interest rates are going to keep rising, and as that happens, is it going to price out the locals? Because
locals are already priced out.
Yeah, wages
locals
aren't great.
Are already priced out. They were priced out at the bottom of the market, and at that point, the pricing wasn't due to interest rates at all. You know what I mean? So it's like we can scapegoat it on whatever we want. We can say, oh, it's COVID and everyone wants to move out of the cities, or oh, it's fire season and everyone's getting away, or it's climate change and people are trying to move to a better climate, or Humboldt County is just getting really freaking cool and people are finding out, any of the above. But the fact is, like, at the end of the day, and this is what I tell people, it's like, we do not have the new building happening here. So it is, I still feel very confident in, like, if I had unlimited money, I would buy more property in Humboldt County because it's so special and it's not very big and it's so close to a lot of things and a lot of people with a lot of money, and it is getting discovered and people are getting priced out. And if you live here and you think you're going to wait another year to buy a property to see if prices go down, you might not afford it in a year. Like, at the beginning of COVID, I had quite a few clients that kind of just backed out, and they're like, well, we think the economy is going to crash, right? It's a pandemic. Okay, sure. I mean, I scroll through the same Instagram you do. I saw all that stuff too, but the opposite happened. And I had people waiting for prices to go down that in the end, 2 years later, could no longer buy a house. And if they had bought when they were originally looking, they could have, in that 2 years, turned around and turned 100K profit. You know what I mean? Which is crazy. So no one could have predicted that. And in fact, no one did predict that would be the result of COVID, that people would get sick of being in their houses and jobs would go online. Like, no one, really knew that was going to have that effect. So anything else like that could happen. And if we had a different, like if we had lots of growth and lots of building, then I would say, okay, think about it. Maybe you want to invest in commercial instead or something, there's I've helped people come from other oceanside cities that are like, I know what this house will be worth in 20 years because I came from Seattle. I came from Costa Mesa or whatever it is, wherever people are along the beach, where prices have just gone insane, and they don't have any doubt that that's going to happen here. None of them. They're
Even
all for sure. They're
even
like,
if the market crashes, you think there's still going to
what
be?
does that mean? The market crash, the local market, the national market?
Well, I think they're intertwined to some extent, right? Well,
Well,
I guess
so
we
yeah,
are kind of insulated though.
well,
That's the
and that's what I
problem.
say. Like everyone says, I have a unique market. It is. It's both. It's not one or the other. It's and or. Yes, if there's a huge national crash in real estate, is our values going to go down? Probably, just from reactionary people. That's when people were like, "Oh, hey, the market crashed. Prices should go down.
Yeah, I'm not
I'm
going
going
to
to
pay
wait."
that anymore.
Or, whatever. I'm not going to list my property now. So though there's always going to be a ripple effect, but it's like I think everyone's like afraid 2008 is going to happen again. And I mean, I feel like I'm pandering a little bit to people, like thinking they're not very intelligent, but the fact is what happened in 2008 wasn't really a market crash. It was like a poor lending situation, and it's been so tightened up since then. It's not that is not going to happen again, not that way. And nobody who works in those fields thinks so.
Thinks that.
Yeah, no, it's pretty hard to get a loan right now. Like,
But are people over? Because national debt is, I believe, the highest it's ever been.
yeah.
Are people overextending getting
Yeah,
these
so
loans?
that's what people wonder. Personally, that's where I always go back to that whole thing of like, if it's housing, then it's worth it. Because how many people do you know who are tenants who are like, I should be able to buy a house. I pay $1,200 a month in rent.
Oh, everybody says that.
Right, and it's not wrong because, but a mortgage can be less than that for the right property, the right down
Yeah,
payment.
but if you instead of getting that $1,200
Mm-hmm.
mortgage, you get the $2,400 one because you can afford it, but
Yeah.
then everything else is rising around you. You're paying more for
Right.
gas.
So what I would say is that of course inflation's a wild card. If you get into a loan you can afford today and something dramatic happens economically to change all of that, you may not be able to afford that loan anymore. Because of other costs, not because the cost of the loan went up. So that is true. How do people buffer that? I mean, nothing happens, I think, that fast as we think it does. Like, we think it's so fast. But if you literally found yourself sitting in a house you could not pay the mortgage on, at this point in time, it's still quite likely that you could sell it and get out from underneath it without having to do a short sale or foreclosure or bankruptcy. If you've lived in it for any amount of time, you build up that equity pretty quick. It's, that's been very true lately. So when people were saying, oh, about COVID foreclosure, right? All these people stalled their mortgage payment and now we're going to have a rash of foreclosures. It's like, well, no, because the market like doubled. So
I thought it was going to
those
happen.
people actually could totally cash out right
Yeah.
now. Nobody's getting foreclosed on because you can sell. So it does depend on little micro fluctuations and what's happening nationally. How do we rebound and react locally? But are people overextending themselves with national debt? Probably. I mean, that seems to be what the indicators are. I'm not an economist. I do know that they look very closely at that when you go to get a loan, though. And they do debt to income ratio, and they're pretty tight on it. And that is why the average person who pays $1,200 a month as a tenant in rent probably can't get a loan, or would be difficult to get a loan because they do have debt, in some cases student debt or car debt. And that, it doesn't matter that they have a good history of paying that amount of money that could also be going towards a mortgage. The bank doesn't look at that. They look at what you're talking about. What is the credit worthiness, of this person? So, yeah, I mean, it could happen. There could be some big fallout. But I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't know what to
get
make
that
of it.
feeling in my gut. Of course, it could happen.
You feel like it's still pretty solid. I thought it was, to be fair, I thought it was going to tank.
With COVID?
Oh, yeah, a while ago. And it didn't. And then I thought it would tank because of inflation 8 months ago. And it didn't.
Maybe I should go back and reread my market reports from them and see if did I call it? I don't know. I think I started to because I noticed that I was losing clients.
because they thought it was going to tank.
Everything stopped for a second because, ironically, real estate was not listed as one of the essential jobs. So all of us were
Oh, so
like,
you guys couldn't work.
so some people like took listings down because they were like, hey, it's not essential. We're done. But then everyone was like, no, it's housing. Of course it's
Seems
essential.
Yeah.
So it was, I don't know if it was like 3 days or a week or whatever. It took them a minute and everyone was like, wait, what? We're in the middle of a transaction. Like someone's buying a house. You can't just shut it down. But yeah, so they got that up and running pretty quick and it was going well. But there were hardly any listings. And a lot of listings got taken down. But, the thing about buyers, especially buyers who are looking for a home, they're looking for a home. They don't care if there's a pandemic going on. They need a home. They need a house for their dogs and their kids or whatever. They need stability. They need what they need. And if they're looking, even a pandemic didn't stop them. Not my buyers, I mean, we had buyers because the lending all changed in the middle. Like the second week of lockdown, it all changed because now people were losing jobs or it was in question of like, your whole financial circumstance changes as a country when nobody's going to work. So they had to reassess and there were people who lost their financing in the middle of a transaction when, they had it the weeks before, but now because of COVID lockdown, they didn't. So there was all this scrambling that happened. And when we all got our feet back under us, all of the insanity of pandemic and internet and the world's coming to an end and blah, 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 like nobody wanted to hear what I had to say as a realtor of like, no, it's fine. Go ahead. Oh, it's still going up a little. It's going up a little. Oh, and now it's going up a lot, and people are, oh, well, it's going to crash. It's going to go down. I can't keep going. Well, yes and no, right? It's like, where are you jumping into the flow of the river? It's going to rain. The river is going to get higher. It's going to be a drought. The river is going to get lower, but you can still catch a ride. It's not like you should just stay out. So it does depend. It just depends on each person, financial, emotional. You never know.
Yeah, I don't know. You're almost like the reverse Chicken Little in that sense, where you're like,
It's
"Hey,
funny.
the
I know.
sky's not falling, guys."
I keep getting told that lately, and I'm trying to be really clear. It could fall, right? But that doesn't mean we don't go on with our lives. I have teenagers that are young adults, and they're just about out of the house and stuff. And I was like thinking about that statistic lately that kids stay at home till they're 26 now or something like that.
Is that
That's
the new
like the
statistic?
national average. And I was like, wow, okay, so I have to readjust my plan, but the fact is, it's like, what do you tell someone of that generation about the world they're going into? They have been raised on devices. They have now lived through 3 years of pandemic in their young lives. They have, fire seasons, they have global warming, they get information from all sources that the world is ending, I mean, Supreme Court decisions. I mean, there's so much happening. So I think the days of like knowing what the heck is going on are gone, and I'm just a realist about that. That makes a lot of people upset when I don't personally engage about certain political or economic things because I'm like, I don't know. I'm just me. I don't. It's so complicated to me. I have my certain things that I'm good at that I know about, and I'll stick to that. But when it comes to real estate, I think it's pretty stable. I think the fact that corporations are buying up properties is an indicator that
It's a sign
we
of
should
something.
consider that yeah, I'm for me, I'm just like, I'm more comfortable. Like, I would so much rather put my 80K into a duplex than Bitcoin because I'm old. Like, I don't trust Bitcoin, I don't understand it. It doesn't, I get it. If I had bought one a long time ago, I'd be happy now. But other than that, I don't understand it. So I wouldn't make that choice, I like something tangible. I like knowing if everything hit the fan and I had to move into something I could or what have you. So for me, it makes sense, that kind of thing. But it won't be for everyone moving forward. I think when I look at my kids and think about upcoming generations, there's going to be a lot of migratory people, a lot of people moving here and there for different jobs because of different money or different opportunity. And I think if the political divide keeps going, it'll start being like, what state do you want to live in based on their politics? And that's going to shift things in a way we may not be able to predict. We don't, we don't know what's going to happen anymore, I think. So, the pace of the world is so fast that, you just do the best you can.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, everybody has been saying it's all going to crash down for so long that it almost just seems like this is the new normal
Well,
now.
and that's where I would just challenge people like, what do you mean it's going to crash? Like, tell me what that means. Do you mean all the people who bought the houses are going to be upside down on their, blah blah blah? Well, I mean, just like with the environment, everything rebounds eventually. And that's why people say when you invest for the long haul. That's why real estate's a long-term investment. That's why the stock market's a long-term. Everyone's looking for the cash cow. And it can be that. I mean, I know some buyers who just bought a property and the people who sold it only bought it 2 years ago and made almost 200K. So
That is so
it's
crazy.
possible, it happens, but trying to time your every investment for that to me is more stressful than, like, for me, real estate represents an investment that you might be able to enjoy. Do you enjoy taking care of property? Do you want to have your own little HGTV moment, decorating something or whatever? Some people feel like it is a service to the community of like, I'm going to take this eyesore. And you know what happens when you do that? And I've seen it. The neighbors are so thankful. They're like, oh, I've had rats running into my yard from that house for years. And oh, I'm so glad you're cleaning it up. Or, even just a house, sometimes you come in and take care of it and people are like, oh my God, you put in a garden. That's amazing. Or thank you for planting that tree. Like, it is a lovely community building event to invest in property. So for me, it's meaningful like that, but it might not be like that for everyone. For some people, it's a liability. You can watch your stocks much easier from anywhere in the world than you can watch your investment if it's a duplex. So it really is individual. And as far as the Chicken Little part, I mean, what does it mean for the market to crash? And, we have that example in our recent lifetime. It crashed in 2008. There's no doubt about it. If it crashed again, it would be a different kind of crash. It would come out of nowhere, just like that one did, and everyone would scramble. So it is important for buyers when they're looking at their interest rate and their mortgage amount that they feel comfortable with that. And now at least you can be assured that the banking industry is tightened down and they're not going to put you into a subprime mortgage. But, there's other things we might be,
Not
what is
able to
that?
see
Apes
yet.
to the cliff. What was those, like that one scene in that one BBC thing where all the animals just kept going off the cliff because the first one went? They were just running towards the cliff
Oh, I've heard about
and
that.
they all just went. And
Yeah.
who knows? That could totally be happening.
I think that's the thing with bison.
Yeah. If ever they're like in a herd. Yeah.
Yeah, and one goes
Yeah.
off, they all
They'll
just
just keep
keep
going.
keep
So
going.
that's what I mean about real estate. It could be, right? It very well could be. But historically, have we ever been able to know right before? Like, unless you're like in on the inner circle, I don't know, someone somewhere probably knew,
Yeah, unless
but
you're like Nancy Pelosi, and then you're
the average investor
yeah,
probably
the standard
doesn't
person's
know.
not gonna be
Yeah.
able to have that inside information.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, like, I don't really even think all those people on Instagram or TikTok, I don't really think they know either. Nobody really, really knows. And so all I try to do on my market reports is look at the stats, I look at the last 3 months, and I just say, what's happening? What happened 6 months ago? What happened 9 months ago? What else is going on in the community? What am I seeing? What am I hearing? So yeah. And things change, you know.
Things do
You
change.
never know what will come of it. But yeah, I still think, I'm happy to talk to anybody about their individual circumstance if they're not sure, if it's a good time to buy or not. But again, it's so individual. I've worked with really, really well qualified people that, could have probably saved or made a lot of money to buy something, and they were like, we're only planning on living here for like 4 or 5 years, so we're just gonna rent. And it's like that's just their choice. That's
Yeah.
okay. That's their personal, like, trifecta of their needs, whatever they might be. So yeah, it's definitely not a realtor's job to judge what people are doing, you know? So, yeah, it's not for everyone.
That's true. And I've heard people speculate that we're going to get to a point where that's the only option, is that you have to rent because you can't. Everything's bought out.
Well, and that I mean, there's a little part of me that fears that just because of all the movies I watch. That's how it is in the future.
Yeah,
Right?
just these
When they portray
giant
the future, nobody
apartment
owns
complexes.
their own house
Yeah.
unless it's some old lady that's like a carryover from the 1900s and she happens to have retained her little small plot of land or something. But no, I don't know. I do think we'll keep going up, even in Humboldt. I know there's like a development planned right on the water for some affordable housing. So that'll be happening. Arcata's Gateway Plan, if you haven't heard of that, the public comment period is, I think, coming to a close in the next month or two. And it's an area sort of near the creamery where there's a lot of sort of either vacant or weirdly used land, and they're trying to define that space by adding housing. And this was all proposed before Cal Poly, I think.
Oh, I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, so there's a really good informative video about it online. I actually recommend Googling like Arcata Gateway Plan, and you can watch a lot of people just are already, there's the whole not in my backyard thing. Yeah, you can build more housing, just not in my backyard or next door to me. And in Arcata, they have basically allotted this area, and they've done some stuff about it, but basically they're going to allow like, and I think in one area it's like up to 8 stories tall, which is
Whoa.
so different in multiple buildings that tall, or around 6 stories, 4 to 6, 4 to 8, something like that, I think.
Is there a lot of pushback against that?
Well, I mean, they've been advertising and seeking public input, and yeah, I'm sure there's been, pushback about that. They are trying to have setbacks for like trees and not make too much shade. They're going to put in a whole separate, like, another plaza, I believe, that's walkable only, like you can't drive into it. And it will, I think all of the buildings that they're putting into this gateway area are supposed to be mixed use. So like a commercial and then residential upstairs. I, specifically asked if there was any owner occupied quantity that was going to be required of this development. And the consensus seems to be that, they're open to that, and that would be great, but that's not going to be necessarily a requirement. I think parking is, like, I think they're anticipating these buildings to have like parking structures underneath, kind of
Wow.
like, how they do it elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I don't know for sure, but there's a ton of information out there. So if you live in Arcata and are interested in finding out more about how Arcata will be changing, that is definitely on the docket in the next 20
That would
years.
be a big
It's
change.
yeah, it will be. Yeah, it is. And they're they're doing the plan, so it will happen. I think.
Wow.
And even this big huge plan, I think, supposed to add, I think they said like 1,000 housing units. So it's not even enough.
Mhm.
But I do think we'll see that upward growth, more apartments. I wish more condos. Or cooperative housing would be great if we could come up with some kind of cooperatively owned units. That'd be cool. But yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, it will be.
Interesting to see.
I think, if you're interested in real estate or like keeping an eye on that kind of thing, Humboldt County is a fascinating market because it's so diverse in the kind of properties that we have. And there's just not that cookie cutter situation. A lot of people it's not uncommon for me to like present an offer and like, oh, I know them, or like have a listing and I'll get a call from an agent and they're like, yeah, my buyer says they know you, and it's like, that's just different than a lot of other places, not everywhere, but so it's kind of a fun one to watch, and there's cool little niche markets here with like the Craftsman and the Victorian and the Pearson homes, which are kind of their own little, I think a lot of people don't love them, but I do. Kind of a mid-century solid redwood house. They're usually a little cheaper because they're different. People don't like a flat roof. But
The flat roofs freak me out. I always just think, oh, if it starts leaking and then you've got all this damage.
yeah,
The hot
so
tar roofs
Pearson's,
freak me out.
yeah,
too.
so here I happen to live in a Pearson, so I'll just give my little pitch on it. They're cheaper to replace those roofs because
Really?
you do have to replace them more often. But you can also maintain them more easily. It's so easy to crawl up on your own roof because it's more or less flat. It's not entirely flat. You can seal reseal, like an average homeowner with, any kind of handy kind of leaning can reseal the places that need to be sealed on that roof pretty easily with a product they can buy at the hardware store. So maintenance on your roof is pretty easy. On the Pearson house specifically, there's no attic. So and it depends on which Pearson you're in. What they have is they have the roofing material, and then they'll have like the sheathing, which is usually just like some kind of plywood. And then in some houses, Pearson houses, it's tongue and groove wood, and in the other, it's this fiberboard. But it's literally like this. I don't even know. It's like a 6-inch ceiling. There's no attic, so it could be argued that you in a Pearson home would see your leak sooner and it would cause less damage because it would come through immediately. Whereas if you had a leak in your attic, you'd have to wait for that leak to hit all the way down and then continue. So, yeah, it's to each their own.
Are the Pearson houses, are those tar roofs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They're like tar and paper roofs. Yeah. Some people do like trestle those up and put a proper peaked roof on them, but I think that ruins their character, their mid-century style.
Yeah, but definitely change the look.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's interesting.
Yeah, they're cool houses, Pearsons. They
definitely
solid.
Look cool.
Most of them have hardwood floors, and the flooring's usually, a known quantity. They're like a known quantity, which is really nice. You can kind of count on certain things with them. They're almost all, like, I think they're all redwood.
Are they just cheaper because people don't like the style?
Well, they're not necessarily cheaper, but I do think some people think because, like, if you didn't know any better, you'd walk in and you could be like, this is the same shape as a mobile home. You know what I mean? With the peaked, because they have peaked roofs inside, so the roofs are slightly peaked inside, and someone could definitely, they were built for function. It was the baby boom after World War II. They needed a lot of housing really quickly. And I think that those houses were designed to be able to be built quickly. Like the wiring does not extend into the ceiling. So, I mean, people have modified them over the years, but when they were built, all the lights were on the walls, on the sides. So sometimes people, again, will buy a Pearson home and they'll never think to look up and see, are any of the lights coming out of the ceiling? And lo and behold, you move in and it gets dark for the first time and you're like, oh my gosh, the only light is on the wall right here next to the door and it's super dim and there's no place to put a light, like, stuff like that. But there's workarounds for all that stuff. But they're interesting houses. They often have a lot of windows, which is nice. And they're not very big. They're not ramblers at all. They're like, the custom Pearsons are like, I want to say like 1,600 square feet is big for a Pearson. They're mostly like 1,000 to 12, maybe 1,300. Most of them are like 3-bed, 1 bath. The kitchens are kind of small,
Built for function.
Yeah, just for function. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Utilitarian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, thank you for coming on and talking with me. We can we can wrap this up. We've already done over 2 hours.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Where can people find you? At Home and Humboldt?
Yeah, so our website is at homeandhumboldt.com. On there, you can check out, we have a weekly events list. It is posted on the website, but you can also subscribe. I do have someone that helps me with that now because I'm one person, but we actually really strive to have the most comprehensive events news list in Humboldt. We pull from and we don't charge people for it. We just do it, so it's not like you have to go in and put in your event list. So that's a really good resource for people, and we will just email it to you, and it's not a spammy thing. If you get on the events list, you only get events lists. That's it.
Like a newsletter.
Yeah, it's just events, and links to events and classes and stuff. And there's a whole section for that on the website. We're working on getting the website built out right now to be sort of like an online magazine for Humboldt County, hoping to start doing videos of some local businesses and highlighting, all the great things about Humboldt.
Oh, that'll be cool.
Yeah. In the meantime, we're just putting up the resources like best restaurants and all that kind of stuff. We also have like a full real estate section to our website. So there's information for buyers, for sellers, for investors. We have a ton of blog posts written that aren't up. So that's like just the bottleneck for me as a business owner trying to be a realtor and a business owner and get a website going. If you want to search for properties, you can search for properties there. You can get a hold of us there. Yeah. Ami Wruck is my name, and my email is my name, amiwruckrealtor@gmail.com. And Brian is my husband. He's not here, but he's also a great realtor. Brian
Shout out to
Wruck.
Brian.
Yeah, Brian Wruck Realtor. We work for the Key Group, which is a locally owned brokerage. Again, being a hyper local person, I like to point out that there's no corporate money involved in our brokerage. So that's kind of nice. It all stays with local people. And yeah, I think that's about it. I'm always like interested in talking to people about real estate or their ideas or thoughts and helping people out. So
Definitely reach out.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, let me thank you. This
Yeah.
was awesome. I really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
talking